Thank you very much. Thank you for that kind introduction. I actually know Stan quite well. I've had quite a lot of conversations with him about artificial intelligence. I see I've only increased his anxiety levels. I will try not to do the same with you. Indeed, my ambition is to try and bust a few myths that many people have about artificial intelligence. I spent the last 40 years trying to understand what it is. My father, who's quite a sharp 91-year-old now, said to me the other day, he said, when you went to university to study that artificial intelligence thing, he said, I thought it was a bit odd, but now I see you were playing the long game. And it is certainly been a bit of a long game, but I've waited long enough and it's now arriving into, it seems, almost every aspect of our lives. And with that, understandably, there's a lot of anxiety, and I'm trying to hopefully bust a bit of some of the myths so that you will leave the talk a bit better informed about what it is, what it can do, where it's going, and a little less concerned that it's going to be an existential problem for us. Okay, but let me begin, and this probably is going to raise your level of anxiety, I'm afraid. First myth, AI is like other revolutions. And it's certainly true. Other technologies have come in and changed our lives. The internet came in and changed our lives. It's impossible to imagine a university, our business, our government, our homes without the convenience and that the internet has given. Similarly, the smartphone came in and changed our lives. Surely AI is just going to be just the same. It's just another step along, another industrial revolution that's going to change the nature of work, but we'll come out of it just like we came out of the internet, we came out of smartphones. I think this is wrong for two reasons. It's wrong in a very technical sense. When I started 40 years ago thinking about building artificial minds, all the other technologies that we built, all the other machines that we've ever built, they did things that our muscles used to do, but they weren't doing things that our minds were used to doing. But now we're building a technology that may potentially do many, if not all of the things that our minds do. So that does create profound issues around, for example, the future of work, but also issues about the future of us, about our own self-worth, our own identity. We used to think that that was the thing that made us special. What was it that we had that the other animals didn't have? Well, it was our intelligence. We grandly put it in our name, Homo sapiens. A bit of a conceit, I think, to call yourself the smart one. But in some sense, there was a truth to that. We were the tool user, the language user. We did use those things to build what you see around you today. This room, everything in this room is the subject of human ingenuity. The lights, the projectors, the seats, the architecture, all of that is the gift of our intelligence. But we may be in a time soon where we are not anymore the most intelligent thing around, and we have more intelligent things. So there's one profound way in which this revolution is going to be different than past revolutions. And there's another much more prosaic reason why this revolution is going to be different than the other revolutions. It goes to the human condition. It's that it's going to unfold so much quicker. The Industrial Revolution took 50 years to happen. We had to build steam engines, electrify our workplaces. It took 50 odd years for that to roll out. We had time to adjust as humans. The internet, even the internet took a decade to happen. We had to get people online. We had to get people used to the idea that they could do their banking, their shopping, their government, their voting, everything online. That took a while. But in this case, it's happening overnight. We've already put the plumbing in. You just have to be told, well, there's this interesting new AI, ChatGPT. Here is the URL, here's the API. You can connect up and start using it. It's not a coincidence that ChatGPT was the fastest growing app ever. 1 million people in the first week, 100 million in the second month. And today, a couple of years later, it's available to 1 billion people. We've never had technologies before that we could put into the hands of so many people so quickly, so easily, so cheaply, and influence their lives. And that itself, I think, is another reason why we're not used to adjusting to changes like this so quickly. But in this case, that's the challenge, the opportunity, and the risk that we face is that we don't have the sort of time that we had with other revolutions. Second myth, that we're building one big AI. The good news is no, we're not. It's not going to, you don't have to worry. We're not building one all-seeing, all-thinking, omniscient AI. We're going to build intelligence. I mean, the great thing, and I'm speaking to a room full of people to know this, intelligence works, minds work very well in a distributed fashion. The world has already got 8 billion of them, and they work quite well in a distributed fashion. And ultimately, we're going to build artificial intelligence that runs on your phone. We're all going to have our own little AI. And there are many, many technical advantages to that in terms of privacy, in terms of latency. But equally, they'll know us. They'll know about us. They'll be sitting there. AI is going to be the operating system of our future. All our devices are going to be sitting there listening, knowing, learning things about us. That's a great power, but also in the wrong hands, a great challenge. Another reason that there won't be one big AI is that, and again, if you listen to what's coming out of Silicon Valley these days, you don't hear this, which is they're trying to build one big, super intelligent machine. I don't think intelligence works like that. Intelligence, if you think about it, how it works with humans, how do we get to be really good at something? By specializing, by focusing, you become an expert on oncology, or an expert on material science, or an expert on 16th century music. We specialize. And similarly, that's actually going to be the next step in artificial intelligence. Is not that we try to build an even bigger, even more capable ChatGPT, but that we actually train them on more focused data sets, that we build more. And we already see this. Here's an example I saw recently. A financial model. There were two companies that could have done this, Bloomberg and Reuters. They're sitting on troves of financial information. And they built a fine-tuned model that's an expert on finance. And now, so if you're sitting in your Bloomberg terminal, you don't have to type in strange syntax questions to query and get financial information out of your Bloomberg terminal. You can ask it questions in English or French or German or whatever language you like. And that's how it's become an expert, by being. You don't actually want your finance advisor to know everything about zoology. You want it to know, your finance advisor, your Bloomberg terminal, to know everything about finance. Astronomy and zoology are actually getting in the way of it being an expert. The next myth, generative AI, like ChatGPT, was a good name. I wish we hadn't called it ChatGPT. I wish we hadn't called it generative AI. I have to admit, people like myself working in the field of AI are terrible at coming up with good names. Generative AI is one example. ChatGPT is another example. I mean, if the people at OpenAI had any idea about the success that ChatGPT was going to be, they'd have come up with a decent name for it. It doesn't really come off the tongue, does it? But they didn't, and we're stuck with it. But anyway, but more broadly, generative AI isn't a good name because it gives you the wrong cognitive clue. You focus on the word generative, of course, it's in there, right? And because it can generate funny memes, funny pictures of the Pope in a white puffer jacket, or today, funny videos, or funny bits of text, or amusing bits of text, or intelligent bits of text. It can generate stuff, text, audio, video, it can generate stuff. And that's a fun capability, and somewhat unexpected capability, I suspect, to many people. But actually, in terms of what's useful for you every day, that's the least interesting thing. The most important, most interesting capability that these tools have is their ability to summarize and synthesize information together. They're absolutely fantastic at taking vast troves of information. In the case of ChatGPT, half the internet, all my books, everyone's books, Wikipedia, the US patent database, vast amounts of information, and allowing you to query it, to summarize it, to synthesize information out of that. That's a fantastic capability indeed. You know, many of us are knowledge workers, many of us are trying to do that ourselves in trying to summarize a particular subdomain of our field. We've suddenly got a fantastic tool that can do that remarkably well. In fact, can do it better than humans can. ChatGPT has read more books than a human could in a lifetime of reading. They can scale things beyond the capabilities of the human mind. And that is a unique gift that we now have to be able to accelerate the way we do science. You can't read all of science. You can't read all of cancer research, not all of science. It is physically impossible, if you look at the rate that papers about cancer are being written, to sit there and read each one continuously. They're being written at a faster rate than a human could read. So how are we going to keep on top of the literature? It's going to be with AI to help us do that. And it's a fantastic tool. And many of the challenges that you hear people talk about, oh, they hallucinate, they make stuff up. They disappear when actually you're asking them to summarize and synthesize. And indeed, nowadays you can put 1 million words, 1 million tokens into the context window, into the input to these language models. They're fantastic at summarizing, synthesizing, not what they've been trained on, but what's in the input as well. Okay, next myth, scale is all you need. If you go to Silicon Valley, that's all you hear these days. And it is remarkable. And it's something, you know, something that maybe is interesting to reflect upon when you think about the brain and human minds as to how we got to build systems, AI systems, artificial minds that are so capable. And largely it is, up to this point, by the idea that scale, throwing more compute, more data, bigger models, has given that. And it's been remarkable. Here's a graph from The Economist that shows you a picture of this. Now, this is a log scale. So a straight line is exponential growth. And you see, and on the x-axis, you've got the year. So starting in 1960, up to the millennium, and then on to today. And you see, up to 2012, it's an almost perfect straight line. And that line has a name. That's Moore's law. That was the doubling in compute power every 2 years. That graph has a gradient of 2. And we will be able to do more because of the benefit of Moore's law. And then you see in 2012, something strange happens. There's a knee in the graph, and it takes off from not doubling every 2 years, but a doubling every 3 to 4 months. That's when we threw more resources at the problem. We threw GPUs, we threw lots of money at the problem, using the current best technology we had then today, and that we have today, transformers and GPUs. And that scaling has given us the performance that we now see today. I have to say that there's some evidence starting to appear that there's diminishing returns, and there has to be diminishing returns. We can't keep on doubling every 3 or 4 months. We're running into money limits and physical limits and data limits. We're running out of data. So it's not clear that we can carry on just scaling. But equally, there are some cognitive capabilities that these models that we have today seem to lack. They're fantastic at retrieving information, summarizing information, synthesizing information. They're not particularly good at reasoning. There's plentiful logical howlers they will come up with. It's not clear that they are able to do all of the cognitive things, and that maybe we need to invent some other things to go into the mix. And if you look at the models, the AI models we have today, they're incredibly simple. There's only one thing in them, the transformer that you may have heard about. If I look at what we're trying to emulate, the human mind, there are in the human brain. It seems improbable to me that we'll get all of the cognitive capabilities of the human brain with just one type of architectural structure. So I suspect we need to discover other things. Silicon Valley would want you to believe that AI training is fair use on their data. Certainly not. We should be outraged that they're taking all of the books of the world, all my books, everyone's books, training them on. They're taking all of the data they can find online and using it. It's not fair use because it's, well, first of all, it's done at a different scale. I mean, people will compare this to, well, it's just like you reading a book, Toby. And if you read a book, then you're inspired by the book. You're changed by the book. What you say, what you do is changed by having read that book, but you're not repeating the book back at me. Well, unfortunately, these models can repeat the book back to you, and they've done it on an industrial scale. ChatGPT, as I said, has read more books than a human could in a lifetime of reading books. It's completely, it's not fair to compare it to human learning, which is much more limited and much more slow. It's also not fair in an economic sense. Yeah, the legal definition of fair use is that you can't then start a business in competition to the person whose intellectual property you have used. Well, they are now starting businesses that are in competition with authors and graphic designers and everyone else. So it's not fair use in that sense. And there's also a myth that they say, well, we have to do this to build these fantastic models. We have to steal everyone's data. Well, they didn't say the word steal. We have to use everyone's data that's available, on the open web. That is patently false. If you go to Hugging Face, which is the open source repository for AI for machine learning, you can find data sets that are in the public domain, that people have got the permissions, that you can build just as good models with. They did it for convenience, they did it for speed, and they also did it because they wanted the high quality data. They didn't want just the model to speak English. This is one of my favorites. This is an old myth. This is a myth actually that goes back before computers. It goes back to Ada Lovelace, 200 more years ago, who was working with Charles Babbage, who said, and this is an interesting thought, computers only do what we tell them to do after all. How could they be creative? It's an interesting objection. Of course, you can apply that to humans. I mean, if we're only biological machines, why is it not a criticism that could be applied to us as biological machines? But there's already evidence that computers can be creative. This is my favorite example. This is a radio aerial that flew on the NASA Deep Space 5 mission. It looks like a bent paperclip as far as I can tell, but it's the first AI that was in space. They wanted to design a radio antenna that worked on many different wavelengths at the same time, which is why you've got all these strange different shapes and sizes in this paperclip, bent paperclip. It turns out this is exactly what you need. They actually built it and they actually flew it in space. It's not the sort of thing you could imagine though a human coming up with. It's not, not an obvious design. Indeed, they have taken a patent out on it, so it clearly isn't an obvious design. But it's an example of how machines could do things that humans certainly have never done. Don't believe anyone who says that AI will be fairer, and don't believe anyone who says AI won't be fairer. It's entirely up to the designers. It's entirely up to us as to what data we train it on. There is the opportunity that with AI, we can make things fairer, more just. Equally, there is plentiful opportunity if we're careless that we will make things even less fair. Humans, let's not forget what we're comparing against. We're comparing against humans, and humans, I'm sure I don't have to tell this room, humans are terrible at making decisions. We're full of cognitive biases, conscious and unconscious biases. We're a catalogue of poor decisions. So there's the opportunity that we could make much more rational, much more evidence-based decisions driven by data using artificial intelligence. But that doesn't happen unless we are very careful. AI systems depend upon the data on which they're trained. Data by its very nature is historical. It reflects the biases of the system in which that data was captured. And if we're not careful, we will perpetuate those biases. I've got a little example here, which was the Apple, when they came out with the Apple credit card. They built an AI system to make the onboarding quick, to decide what credit limit to give you. They knew that historically credit card limits have been sexist. Men would typically be given bigger credit limits than women. So they were very careful to try and design a system that wouldn't be sexist. And indeed, they made sure of that by not including gender as one of the inputs to the AI system that was deciding the credit card limits, in the hope that this would be fairer, that it wouldn't carry the cognitive, conscious and unconscious biases that humans have when they decide what credit limits to give people for their credit card. It turned out to be terribly flawed, and was terribly sexist, because there are many variables that are correlated with gender that were still there, that it was able to learn from it, the historical biases of the past, and indeed they had to throw it away. Don't believe anyone that says that AI will take jobs, and don't believe anyone who says that AI won't take jobs. We have no idea. Economists will make frequent pronouncements. 47% of jobs are at risk of automation. Technology has always destroyed jobs. Technology has always created jobs. Historically, more jobs have been created than ever been destroyed. There is no guarantee that that is necessarily the case moving forwards. We have no idea what the net balance will be this time, for the very good reason that I mentioned at the start of my talk, which is previously the cognitive things were the realms of only humans. Suddenly, we have to ask the question, what's left for humans? Now, there's lots of things actually left for humans. We have emotional intelligence the machines don't have. We have social intelligence the machines don't have. We have creativity that machines only have a limited amount of. Adaptability, flexibility, and then at the end of the day, there's lots of things that we want humans to do. I don't want to be in aged care looked after by a robot. I want to be in aged care looked after by a person. I don't want a robot to make me a cup of coffee. I want a barista who will remember me and crack a joke with me, who will make me a cup of coffee. There's lots of places where humans will be preferred, even if machines are better at doing those jobs. So we don't know what the net balance is. Again, I lied to you at the start when I pointed out, that we were the smart one, that was the thing, that was our superpower, that we were the intelligent one, and that we put it in our name. That's actually a conceit, a human conceit. Our superpower was our society, our ability to come together and work collectively. We're far better, far stronger, far more capable as one than we are individually. That was our superpower. Of course, we used our intelligence. We invented language. We built institutions to be able to enable that, but it was our ability to work together that is actually our true superpower. And those are the things that we will continue to do, even when we've got intelligence assistants to help us do those. In terms of jobs, it used to be people said, "Oh, learn programming. The jobs of the future will all be in coding." Unfortunately, that turned out not to be the case. Indeed, many firms are not recruiting software engineers this year. These language tools like ChatGPT, a large language model like ChatGPT, is really good at one particular language, a very precise language, programming languages. It shouldn't be a surprise. They're much more regular, much more well-behaved than human languages. Programming languages have precise syntax, precise semantics, and these tools turn out to be fantastic at helping you write code. So I'm not sure in the future we'll need more coders. Even if we're writing more code, we'll be having the machines doing that. Another myth and worry and anxiety that people have is that AI is an energy hog, and it's certainly something that we need to be mindful of. We look at the numbers, you look at the data centers that are being built, and you worry about all of that energy that's being consumed and the heat that's being generated. And of course, all of us are worried about the climate and how we're destroying the planet. And surely AI is just going to be contributing to that by using even more resources. And that's true in the short term. There's an arms race. People are spending more and more on data centers. Hundreds of billions of dollars are being spent on data centers every year. And we have to be mindful of all that energy. But it's still small things in the grand scheme of things. The data centers computing uses about 2% of global electricity. It's set to possibly to double, so it might be 5%. And electricity is 1/5 of world's energy demands. Most of it's in fuel and other carbon products. So we're still using less than 1% of the world's energy, 1% of the world's carbon budget on computing. I mean, it's still 1%, but it's nothing like what we spend on transportation or agriculture or transportation. And ultimately, it will go down. We're building models more efficiently. Ultimately, we're building models that will run on your mobile phone. We won't have to worry about the energy demands. It will be 7 watts of power. The reason that I'm confident about that is because I know about this. This is 20 watts of power. We're trying to build what the human mind does with 20 watts of power. So intelligence can be built with 20 watts of power. We've just got to work out how to do that. It's also a myth to think we don't need to regulate AI. There's lots of existing regulation that we should be applying to the digital space, and we're starting to do that now. In fact, we're starting to wake up. But we don't want to, social media should have been a practice exercise. We didn't regulate social media, and after the event, 10, 20 years later, we're now discovering there are some rather bad externalities. The anxiety levels amongst young people, body image, especially amongst young girls, those have been severely impacted by social media. And probably we should have put some safeguards in, and we're now doing that. I'm a great supporter of the social media age ban, that we need to protect young minds. That should have been a wake-up call for something that's going to be even more potent in our lives. We've still got social media, but we're now going to supercharge that by AI-generated content, AI bots that we talk to, AI bots that we have relationships with, AI therapists. There's a host of areas where you can see potential trouble. And the troubles will be like the troubles we saw with social media, where they might be really small effects. But because this has such a large footprint, it reaches billions of people, even very small footprints multiplied by billions have significant consequences to large numbers of people. And we're going to have questions very shortly, but just one final myth, maybe the one that was worrying Stan most, which is that these artificial minds aren't like human minds. They're not conscious. They don't have desires. They don't have wishes. They're not going to do things other than what we ask them to do. And in that sense, we don't have to worry about them. We do have to worry what they're powerful tools that will be misused by humans, but we don't have to worry that they themselves will decide that they're in charge and they're going to take over. They're not an existential threat, as Hollywood would like you believe. So it's all up to us humans, as usual. And just to end there, with time for some questions. And as was mentioned in the introduction, I have written a couple of books. Here are the most recent ones that might be useful, thinking about some of the ethical questions that I touched upon very briefly, worthy of a book. So I've written that book, Machines Behaving Badly. I talked a bit about generative AI and about how we're going to be fooled by it and our relationship with it. And I wrote a book called Faking It about that. And my most recent book, which is a whistle-stop tour of all that we've done in artificial intelligence and where it might take us, called The Shortest History of AI, which is a light-hearted introduction. I'm told it's quite a fun read that will make you an expert on AI. The subtitle of the book is 6 Ideas of All You Need to Know. So once you've read that book, you can save yourself the 40 years I spent working in the field and come up to speed. Thank you very much. Thank you, Toby. We've got time for some questions. Kathy. Kathy.
So thank you very much. Very interesting, thought-provoking. But what I'm interested in, or as well, what I'm interested in, is the future of truth in AI.
Wonderful question. Yeah, actually, that's the thing that probably keeps me awake at night more than anything, which is that we're about to be in a world. We're used to seeing the things that we hear and see, because that used to be a reasonable metric. It was, we've always had the ability to fake stuff. I mean, shortly after they invented photography and the Victorians invented fake photography. There were pictures of fairies and things but it was difficult. It wasn't very believable. Now we have these amazing tools that can generate video that is impossible to tell apart from the real thing. And the problem there is the price is paid not by the people telling the lies, the price is paid by the people telling the truth, because we no longer believe those people either. And that we may wake up in a world in which we're living in this AI-generated bubble of AI content that was chosen for us by the AI, that no one else sees, that was chosen for us, and that we no longer share common languages and common stories and common purpose. So
that was a recruitment drive there.
I want to leave you with
Yes.
one hope, one piece of optimism about that. So I think that's something, when I talk to politicians about the long-term effects, that's the long-term effects. I think the corrosive long-term effect that we have to worry about. There is some technology coming along to help us with it, which is digital watermarks. They're a few years away, but if you remember what happened with the internet, when we realized that we were going to do our finances, our banking, our shopping online, we invented this technology called digital certificates, so that when you went to this website that said the Commonwealth Bank, you could guarantee it was going to be the Commonwealth Bank because it had a digital certificate that verified using cryptographic excitements and to do that for you. And you didn't have to do anything. It was embedded into the fabric of your browser, and you would have to click to say, do you really want to go there, and be protected from it. We'll have the same with digital watermarks, that the camera companies are working with the media organizations to build this into the fabric of the internet, of our devices, so that when you take a picture, its digital watermark is added to that picture, and it says, yeah, this was the BBC correspondent in Gaza who took this picture. You can trust it, or no, it's been altered. It's different. It's nothing. It's not what the BBC correspondent took. That will be in a few years' time in all of our devices, trying to protect us, trying to separate truth from false for us. Problem is that some years away, and what we do in the meantime, I don't know.
Any other final question? Fernando.
Great talk. Can I ask you your views on how do you think things would change in education? And I don't mean the cheating exams, things like that. To make the analogy, we all grew up, we know how to drive a car. If now AI makes cars to drive self-driving, the day that stopped working, we can still grab the handle and the steering wheel and drive. So in medicine and things like that, the next generations are going to be kind of bypassing a lot of things that they learn because, hey, that's it. Can you say what's the...
A lovely question. There's a fantastic essay by Neil Postman, a humanist, called 5 Lessons from Technological Change. And one of his lessons is, for every technology, ask what it gives you and ask what it takes away. And I think we have to ask that question, that if we don't do those things, are we dumbing ourselves down? Do the machines become more intelligent than us because we become more stupid? And there's plentiful evidence that, we're lazy, it's a natural human trait that if we outsource things to machines, that will have cognitive consequences. We're the last generation that knows how to subtract. No one knows how to subtract anymore. You make change at the supermarket, they look at you blankly. I suspect we're the last generation that will know how to read a map because we're outsourcing that to our devices. Of course, it's clear to see what we get. I'm lost a lot less than I used to be when I was a young boy. But there's also plentiful evidence that you don't learn your local neighborhood if you don't navigate yourself. If you just follow the directions, it doesn't go into your brain. You don't learn what's around you. And then if you don't have data or connectivity or power, then you're lost. And there's a wonderful story, a very prescient story written by Ian Forster over 100 years ago, called The Machine Stops, which warns us of this future, warns us that we don't want to become too dependent upon the machines, because then when the machines stop, so do we.
Okay, we'll stop there. So I'm going to take two things out of this. What's worth learning? I'm going to dwell on that one.
Yeah.
Well, and I think for a university and when the worlds that we teach, the people are bringing up what is worth learning is a critical challenge for us every day.
There's loads of things worth learning. Critical,
Yes.
critical thinking skills, communication skills, the list goes on. The machines will never do those things.
And the second one for us is around social cohesion, is actually the capacity of any community, including our own community, to act cohesively towards social good, which is hopefully one of the things in the Brain and Mind Centre that we remain focused on. So thank you, Toby. Thank you very much for your keynote address. Thank you. At this point, I'll hand over to Kathy.
Thank you, Toby. And I am so excited. I put up my hand to introduce this session. And so now we're going to be talking about partnering for good. And we had three awesome examples of this, one philanthropic, one industry, and one international research. Unfortunately, that industry partnership we can't do because Nick Everett is unwell. So our warmest wishes are with him and his family, but we do have philanthropy and international research collaborations. So philanthropic partnerships are particularly special. They're different from writing a grant and set and forget. Philanthropic work, you have to have a relationship with your partner, but they often fund work that isn't really fundable or difficult to fund in research grants because it's often a different kind of research. And there's many examples of that. But it's also incredibly rewarding because you can see the direct impact on communities. So what we're going to showcase today as a philanthropic partnership is the work between Rory Clifton Bly and the TDM Foundation and Associate Professor Eleanor Drummond. And so I'm delighted to introduce Rory Clifton Bly, who leads the TDM Foundation. And what they're doing is advancing the mission of scaling social impact by partnering with Australia's most effective social organisations. And I'm pleased to say that I have done research with one of Rowley's relatives of some sort with the same name. And also to introduce Eleanor Drummond, Associate Professor Eleanor Drummond, who I hope, who I'm sure you all know, but she's a neuroscientist, senior lecturer and Blue Sand Senior Research Fellow. Blue Sand is amazing, at the Brain and Mind Centre. And her team uses proteomics, neuropathology and cell culture approaches to identify the protein drivers of multiple neurodegenerative diseases, including Alzheimer's disease, frontotemporal dementia, epilepsy and Down syndrome. Thank you for your work, Eleanor. It is so important in today's world. And also, I'm delighted to introduce Emily Hickman, who will be, what do you call it? Facilitating this session. So Emily is the Deputy Director of Development at the Brain and Mind Centre and is an amazing partner for us. Thank you, Emily. And she'll be facilitating the discussion between Rowley and Eleanor. So thank you very much.
Thank you for such a wonderful introduction, Kathy.
Very quickly say something, Kathy. It's so unfair. My parents had their first son. They called him Rory. And then they had two daughters. And then they had me. And they thought, you know what? We really like the R name, so we're going to call him Rowley. So all my life I've been called Rory. So my mother, she struggles with it. So you're not alone. So I'm very sorry about that.
Thanks everyone for coming. It's lovely to be here and welcome Rory and Eleanor. Thanks for joining us today. I'm really keen to hear about your thoughts and perspectives on philanthropic partnerships. I might start with you, Rowley. How did you hear about the BMC?
Oh gosh, great question. In two ways. The first was when we started the foundation 5 years ago, and we're a new foundation and you're trying to work out what area do you want to impact. And so we started doing some desktop research. Who are the key institutes in Australia? Who are they being led by? What was their focus areas for impact? Who was funding them, etc. And we spoke to a lot of people in the medical research industry as well. And BMC just kept coming up as a great place full of great scientists. And so it was put on our radar that way. And then the second way we became aware of BMC was when we actually came to support an initiative. Now, I'll talk about our approach a bit later in the discussion, but I just would say we're largely disease agnostic, which means that we're happy to support any disease area. The one exception I'd say to that is where we have partners or stakeholders where a particular disease might be really important to them. And so one of our founders had a family member who died from progressive supranuclear palsy. And we were really keen to support that work. And so with our medical research committee, we started reading papers and journals and asking lots of questions of people in the sector. And they were, and the journals as well, showed us this path was towards Professor Glenda Halliday and Eleanor's work. And so we reached out to BMC and said, could we please have a proposal? And that was a couple of years ago, and we've been funding Eleanor's work ever since.
Wonderful. And Eleanor, over to you. Yeah, that's wonderful. From a research perspective, I think that most people in the room might be familiar with your work, but if they're not, can you give us a bit of an overview of your work, of your research?
Sure. Well, Kathy gave a lovely overview in my introduction. Mostly my work is focused on trying to understand disease mechanisms of various neurodegenerative diseases, with a key focus on Alzheimer's and also primary tauopathies, for which PSP, or progressive supranuclear palsy, is one of them. And what our research really wants to do is look at fundamentally what are those things that are going wrong in the brain. And we really care about the protein changes that are happening in these diseases. And from an academic perspective, I find this fascinating because while we know a lot about these diseases, we really are only scratching the surface. And so from our perspective, it's been lovely to do a real deep dive into all of those different protein changes that are occurring to try and see if we can find ones that might be particularly important and might have potential as biomarkers or drug targets. And I think this is so important because from a neurodegenerative disease standpoint, we're not very good at definitive diagnosis of many of these diseases. We don't have blood biomarkers that we can offer for many of these. Alzheimer's just now this year is starting to roll out some blood biomarkers available clinically. But for the other neurodegenerative diseases like PSP, we really struggle to diagnose them. And we don't have any truly modifying disease treatments that we can offer. And so take PSP, for example, which really has been the focus of part of my lab for the last 2.5 years. We know that when we look in someone's brain with PSP, we can see a whole bunch of tau that aggregates inside of there. But we don't know the answers to a lot of fundamental questions, like why is it aggregating in the first place? And what is it doing from a toxicity perspective? And this protein to me is really interesting because it accumulates in lots of different diseases like Alzheimer's, PSP, and also in CTE, which is the disease that all of the footballers are getting from the repetitive head injuries. But from a PSP standpoint, why do some patients develop this disease and what is different about it? And so we use proteomics to look at all of those different disease-associated protein changes at once, focusing in on particular subgroups of proteins, like ones that become insoluble, and also ones that interact with the protein tau, because we think that those proteins might be the most important from a disease perspective in terms of being potential drug targets. We've also been focusing, excitingly recently, on developing new cell models of disease because we didn't actually have anything in the lab available to us that could reflect the human condition of these diseases. And so we've spent considerable time developing this. We didn't think we'd have to. I really wanted to buy one so that we could just quickly try these protein changes, are they good or bad? But we couldn't do it. And so some amazingly talented members of my team who are here today really have set about to try and create the world's first PSP human cell model that reflects human disease. So this is kind of like, I'm so excited about what we've found so far in the last 2.5 years, because I think it's really setting us up for finding some new biomarkers and drug targets going forward.
You mentioned some timeframes there. I'm just curious, Rolly, from TDM's perspective, why is basic science important to support even when the outcomes may not be apparent for many years?
Well, for a number of reasons. I would say the first point is just to address the basic science element. And I think that it's so critical to so many of the clinical breakthroughs that happen. And for us who's looking to fund earlier stage research and see it through, hopefully, to that clinical application, the basic science is often the building blocks for that. And so it's a really important thing to support and to fund. In terms of the funding itself, I would say that we just know how competitive the landscape is. I mean, people in this room will know it much better than me, but with NHMRC funding or MRF funding, Research Institute funding, you know, it's not a pie that's growing substantially. And it's really hard, and scientific breakthroughs and research breakthroughs take time and effort and cost money. And often science doesn't progress, again, people in this room would know much better than me, in a straight line. And so I feel you need a funder who's willing to go and walk alongside and support the researchers for that, you know, for that duration. And I think, although, sorry, you might think that a fund manager and a foundation, we're connected to a fund manager, and BMC might not have any, or might not have much in common. I think the time period and impact we do, because if you think about what the fund manager is doing, it's allocating capital, and often those decisions are made over multiple years, and they're trying to realise financial gains, not necessarily measured in 6 months or a year, but over decades. And on the foundation side, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to back initiatives that are earlier stage, that we think if we can fund them for multiple years, can realise their impact. And whether it's medical research impact that we do and support on the medical research side, or other impact, social impact on the non-medical research side, that takes years to realise. And so that part doesn't worry us at all. And in fact, we see it as an obligation to support.
Fabulous. And what does TDM look for in a philanthropic research partnership?
Well, a number of things. We, as I mentioned earlier, we are disease agnostic. So that might say, hey, you're willing to back the universe of, you know, diseases. We do try and narrow it down, and we try and narrow it down in a couple of ways. We, as I have mentioned, we're looking to back that earlier stage, those earlier stage initiatives. So what does that mean? It means that the research might have a couple of years, the research team a couple of years under their belt. They're progressing some really interesting scientific results. They're starting to get excited about that, but they're going, actually, well, where might we get some additional funding to support this work? And so that's where we start to look. And then we say, well, what are some really new and novel ideas that we're seeing in this space, or that have been brought to us, that we think could have outsized impact? And when I say new and novel, that could be because it's a new approach to something that's existing, or it might be something that actually hasn't been looked at because funding hasn't allowed. And so I think about Eleanor, and when we started speaking with her, and Eleanor was saying, look, I've done all of this work in Alzheimer's, and I'm, you know, had you know, really exciting prospects, but I can really see this has application to PSP. And I would love to do that. I just haven't had the funding to be able to do it. And so we felt that was a great place, you know, around this new and novel concept for us to, aspect of what we do is to step in there, and it fitted our criteria. I think additionally, we also look at the Research Institute. Like the culture is really important for us, and we spend a lot of time with the people before we decide to back them, because we think that's key. And so that's not just Eleanor, it's Eleanor's team, it's BMC itself, it's what, you know, when we meet with people from BMC, how do they turn up? Are they as enthusiastic as Eleanor, which is a hard benchmark?
Hard to beat.
Yeah, hard to beat. But we're definitely looking at that. We're really happy also to take risk. I think that is something we and Kathy was alluding to this before. We're very happy to take risk and think that's really important because we know funding can be difficult in that space for the riskier initiatives. And from an outcome perspective, of course, when we meet with researchers, we like knowing what their outcomes are, but we're not using that as a stick. We're just like, hey, what are you trying to achieve? So you've got a clear kind of endpoint. But again, if that means that they don't get to that endpoint, but they've found something else, I mean, that's fantastic. And it made me think. Recently, we were catching up with another set of researchers in another institute, and they were looking at cancer and ecDNA, and they had this, we think this is the pathway. And we caught up with them about a month ago, and they're like, well, we thought that was the pathway, but we've actually discovered all of these other pathways. And now we're trying to work out how to prioritize our work. And we're like, well, actually, what funding would you need to do all of them? And so that's then the conversation that you're having with them. And so the other things I'd say too is that we are willing to fund for multiple years. We do know research takes time. And yeah, we think that's a really important component as well.
Absolutely. Back to you, Eleanor. From a research perspective, can you tell us a bit about how philanthropic partnerships have progressed your work when they may not have been attractive to government funding?
So this is a loaded question, Emily. I guess I can safely say that my research group wouldn't be as successful as we are without philanthropic funding. And I think this largely comes because I personally have struggled a lot with trying to get either NHMRC or ARC funding. And I know it's not something we usually talk about, but seriously, guys, I have applied for NHMRC grants every year since I moved to Australia, and I'm yet to be successful in one. And I'm okay with this because there are other funders who are willing to back the research, and this includes Rowley and also other people like international foundations. So I know it's not the ideas that are terrible. It's just the fact, I think, that the research that we are doing is at that weird intersect between NHMRC and ARC, where we're focused on disease, but we're looking at fundamental mechanisms, and it's not yet translational. And this is where hearing everything that Rowley just said is just so lovely, because this is something that all of the researchers are facing here, where there is this, number one, there's not enough money in government funding at all. I think we can all safely agree. I've had some lovely times of rejections from Category 6 grants. That's not fun to have. But number two, everything is so translationally focused these days because of the limited money. And while that's really important, I just really want to emphasize from a basic science perspective, it's valuable. There is no way that we can try and develop new translational diagnostics and therapeutics if we don't know what's going on in the brain. And that shouldn't be a nice to have, that should be essential. And so this is what philanthropy has been so amazing for me, in the sense that I can have those conversations and they're actually willing to see the importance of this and see the longer term vision. Because it is a long-term vision. I'm really hopeful that some of the findings that we've made over the last few years will translate. And I can now think that I can write more successful NHMRC grants because we have found these targets that I think are going to be really relevant and kind of within that government agenda. And so philanthropy has really opened up that world, and also thinking bigger. So thinking longer term. It's so lovely to think, like sometimes I get asked these questions, what would you do if you had $10 million, $20 million? It is a big question to ask, but it's really nice to start thinking about mapping out your future research career together with a partner who actually wants to know and is wanting to help you try and get there. So it's really lovely.
And you've both sort of touched on this briefly, but what do you think makes a research or a project attractive to a philanthropic funder?
Well, I think from my perspective, it is having a clear research vision that you can articulate well. You will be faced, it's not like a regular grant application. It is chatting to someone who wants to know, why is your research important? Why is it so critical? And you have to be able to clearly state that. And I think one of the key things that I've always had as a takeaway is enthusiasm and passion for your research. If you're not excited about your research, no one listening to you is going to be excited. And the thing is that we're all doing really exciting research. We wouldn't be doing it if we weren't excited about it. But you have to be able to communicate that really well. But in saying that, it comes with a caveat because you can't oversell, because I know that sometimes we tend to overhype. And I have found it really refreshing to be able to have those honest conversations with partners to say, I do want to find a drug target, a new drug target, and translate it to a potential therapy for these diseases. But this might take 15, 20 years. And for them to actually back me and say, wow, okay, let's try and do it. That's amazing. You can't say that in a grant application. So those are just some of the things that I think have been worked well.
Yeah, fantastic. And Rolly, what advice would you give to researchers who want to lean into philanthropy to fund their work?
Lots of whining and dining. No, I'm joking. I'm joking. I would get to know the space, the philanthropic space. There are lots of foundations and social enterprises that have impact at their core out there, and I would do some research on who they are. If I think what we're part of, so we have a foundation connected to a fund manager, but we're also, in terms of the medical research that we do, we're connected to something that's called Hearts and Minds. It's a really, I won't go into a lot of detail, but it's a really innovative funding concept that supports medical research, and we're one of their core fund managers. The team don't charge a management fee that would normally be charged, and what the equivalent you're able to direct towards supporting medical research. And over the last 10 years, they've donated $83 million to support medical research. And that's one. And yes, they've done really well, and it's great to support medical research in that way, but there's others. And I think learning who they are, like learning what their strategy is, like what are their priorities, when do they grant funds, what do they look for in the grant, how much detail do they want the science behind it, or do they want more of the emotional pitch? All of those aspects, I think, are really important, and getting across it. Understanding if they grant for multiple years or 1 year, do they support infrastructure, or are they happy doing the basic science? Because it's actually really, I was just looking at like Toby, I think, could be an exercise for ChatGPT. It's just, I think, really important to do. And then I go and try and establish a relationship, reach out to them, tell them about your work. And I think, to connect back to a point Eleanor was alluding to a moment ago, I think communication is key.
Yeah.
And I think you have to be able to communicate in lots of different ways. And so there is some foundations who will want the science, and there's some foundations who will want more of the emotive pitch, and there'll be some that are in between. But I think as a researcher, and I'll embarrass Eleanor, is that she is an expert at going across all of them. So when we have a science, when we're asking more of the sciencey questions, she will just go, bang, it's about 100,000 feet above my level, but it's relevant to the people in that room who want to hear all of that. And then when we're asking, so can you explain and tell a story about your research, because it's a way that we can remember, she'll tell a really, really great story. And to the layperson, you go, okay, I've got it. This is a really complicated area, but I can understand it.
Yeah.
And then just being dogged, like in terms of the approach. Like, yes, a foundation might be fully allocated for the next year, but don't stop. Like, give them an update of where you're at, what you're thinking. And I can think of one example at the moment where there's a particular lady who is literally, we allocate every 6 months, and every 6 months before we allocate, she doesn't strictly fit into our strategy. She writes and says, could I please be considered? And here's my update. And we've now got to the point where working with HM1, we're like, we have to do something.
Just include her in.
We've got to find a way to help, because she is just so good, and we need to find a way to support her. And so I think that kind of dogged determination is really important as well. But I do think, the science, if you get that to speak for itself and really showcasing what you can do, establish the relationship, I think all of those things, and then just don't take no for an answer.
Yeah.
And then, I think all of those are ways to
Yeah, wonderful. And you've briefly mentioned bits and pieces on this one, but is there anything else that you can add that makes a funder-researcher relationship partnership successful?
Oh, I think, again, there's probably a few elements. I think one is, of course, people in this room, you come with your own values and beliefs, and BMC no doubt has that. But I think also being cognizant of the funder's values and beliefs. So to sort of hopefully make that a bit tangible. So at TDM, the team is really passionate. Like, it is super passionate. You've got people who this is their identity. And of course, that could be, to reference Toby again, one of our biases in decision making. But you know, when you speak to Eleanor, that shows through in spades. And I know, Eleanor, you're referencing it as part of your answer too. And so I think those being mindful of those things. And then I think just coming back to communication, like Eleanor recently received an international grant. And of course, we got the update. We were so excited to hear that. So bringing them along, I think is really important. And I think the other thing, lastly, I'd say is, again, you might not think in terms of overlap, in terms of the skill sets in this room and the skill sets in a foundational fund manager overlap at all, like the circles never meet. But I actually think they do in lots of spaces. And I think if there's aspects of your work where a foundation or a funder can help, I think just being open to that. Yeah. Like, I can think of one of the initiatives we've supported for the last 5 years. We've just gone through a 2-year project with them where we've been very, very involved. We helped recruit the team, we helped build their website, we helped build their learning management system, we've helped with their marketing and their communications and their rollout, and we've built a board. It goes, because we want to lean in and help. And so I like to think if we weren't there, then that might have been harder for them to do. But yeah, I just think being mindful of those opportunities where collaboration is possible.
Did you want to add anything?
Well, I guess, yeah, you've really touched on what I was going to say as well, which is recognizing the importance of the relationship and valuing it. Like, I place my relationship with my philanthropic funders super high. If they want something, I'm going to communicate with them because I see them genuinely as partners in the research with me. And I always am hoping for like longer term partnerships going forward. And so yeah, it's the showing up, it's the honesty, it's the bringing them in where you can, and yeah, just genuinely seeing it for the partnership it is.
Cool. Thank you so much, Rolly and Eleanor. It's been wonderful to speak with you today, and thanks for being part of the conversation. Thank you.
I wanted to shake your hand, Rolly. That was so cool. And I think that was just an amazing example of how philanthropy can help you do that really risky research and to amplify it, not just the questions that you ask, but in actually augmenting the team. So how amazing is that? And as Eleanor said, there's a big focus on translational research, but you actually have to have something to translate. And in the world that Eleanor is investigating, there isn't anything to translate. So it is just as critical as then translating it when we actually have the information and the knowledge. So fabulous session, and I learned a bit of a story about Eleanor's research, not just the science. That's fantastic. So now I'm really delighted as well to welcome Adam. Stop texting, Adam Gastella. And Lauren Brookman-Frazee. So come on up. Oh, one at a time. Oh, okay. So yeah, I think you should come and sit and cheer. Yeah. But I'm delighted to introduce you, Lauren. Oh, I'll leave my stuff there. I'll move it. So Professor Lauren Brookman-Frazee is Professor of Psychiatry at the University of California, San Diego. And the overarching goal of Lauren's community partnered research is to improve the effectiveness of community services for children with mental health and developmental needs. And so you're going to present first. And then Adam, well, I introduce you now, Adam, and then you can just pop up and talk. I'm sure Adam needs no introduction. I'm always bragging about Adam and his work. So Adam is the Michael Crouch Chair in Child and Youth Mental Health. His work aims to build collaborative partnerships between researchers, clinicians and services to ensure that children and families receive the best available assessments and treatments to support wellbeing and development. Yeah. So Adam leads the Child Neurodevelopment and Mental Health team at the Brain and Mind Centre. So together, Adam and Lauren will be presenting about research partnerships driving system change. So thank you.
Okay, that's fine. I could let you present that. No, just kidding. Thank you so much for having me. I'm just really thrilled to be part of the symposium today and be welcomed here. I've learned a lot already and am excited about the different partnerships that, that we could embark on. So thank you for that introduction. I appreciate it. As far as a little bit more introduction of what I do. So I'm from the University of California, San Diego, traveled here this weekend. And the space in which I work is implementation science. And so I lead a few different centers that are involved in conducting implementation research and then training others to engage in implementation science. So I could co-direct across medical areas and across disease foci, the Dissemination Implementation Science Center, or the DISC, at UC San Diego. And our focus is really helping to build capacity of researchers and practitioners who are interested in applying implementation science methods. So again, there's no specific disease area or medical area that we're focused on, but again, kind of integrating implementation science methodology broadly for community impact. My specific area of focus is in children's mental health services. So I also lead a research center that's focused on developing strategies to help move evidence-based practices into children's mental health services. And then I lead a training program that's interdisciplinary, that's focused on applying implementation science to facilitate access to evidence-based services for autistic children. And I should acknowledge my colleague, Colby Chabowski's here with me, and she's the training director of our LEND program. So I'll be talking today briefly about what is implementation science, and then an example line of research that is an opportunity potentially for collaboration. So who here has heard of implementation science? Okay, there's some hands here. So, so implementation science is really the scientific study of methods to promote the uptake of research and evidence-based practices into routine care services. And it's really with the goal of improving the quality and the effectiveness of health services. So really bridging what we know from the research to what is actually done or delivered within community services. And implementation science really emerged as an area of research based on this recognition of the research to practice gaps. And there were data to suggest with traditional ways of disseminating research that it took 17 years for only 14% of research findings to make it into to practice, and with kind of the traditional dissemination strategies. But with an active implementation approach, we can really speed that up for just a few years and much more of the research getting into practice. So that was really the impetus of implementation science and implementation research. So there's a couple areas of implementation science I would just highlight that, again, they cut across different contexts. The first one is that implementation science is really grounded in the routine care context. And typically involves understanding the service context and a needs assessment, and that really driving the selection of interventions and practices and the development and the strategies used to implement. There's a lot of theories, models, and frameworks that are there to really help us organize the information and the complexity of what it takes to implement evidence-based practices in routine care. There's a strong emphasis on community engagement, conducting relevant research, and then the methods typically include both qualitative and quantitative research, using an iterative approach that I'll show you, conducting hybrid effectiveness and implementation trials, and where we're randomizing, often not at the patient level, but at the clinic level, for example, and I'll show you an example of that. So my research, or much of my research, is really focused on improving care for autistic children. Now, in California and more broadly in the States, there's lots of different service systems that care for autistic children, and they're kind of siloed into different areas. And this slide just kind of illustrates that there's multiple service systems. When we go to different places, the specifics look different, but there's these siloed areas that really don't always talk to each other about when caring for an individual. And so I'm focused on mental health services, children's mental health services, outpatient school-based mental health services that actually don't specialize in serving children with autism. They are general children's mental health, but we know they're relevant for this population because there's high co-occurrence of mental health disorders and needs in autism. So my research was really prompted by the needs of mental health providers who don't specialize in autism, and the therapists were saying, we really need more tools and training to effectively serve this population. We don't get a lot of training, and we need it because we see lots of kids on the autism spectrum in our clinics, even though we don't specialize. And caregivers said the same things, that the therapists really didn't know how to help. What was fortunate here is therapists and caregivers are saying the same thing, and everybody's really motivated to improve care. And so our research was really responding to community identified needs using an iterative approach and partnership with caregivers and children, therapists, clinic leaders and supervisors, and system leaders who were all interested in improving care for this population. So this research is primarily funded by the National Institute of Mental Health in our NIH, really started with a needs assessment and initial development and testing, in which we did a mixed methods needs assessment, talking to caregivers, talking to therapists, looking at videos that we had of usual care psychotherapy, and taking that information, integrating it with what we knew from the research, different evidence-based strategies, and then packaging it from what we knew about the service context in outpatient and school-based mental health. And what we came up with was an intervention and corresponding training model that we call the individualized mental health intervention for children with autism, that really was a package of evidence-based strategies to develop individual caregiver and child skills to address interfering behaviors in this population that were receiving mental health services. It was specifically designed for mental health services, not educational services, not autism specialty services, but it was designed for that population. And then we also designed the training model around what the training needs were of the therapists who don't specialize in autism but are currently serving them. So I'm not going to go into exactly what AIM High is, but I will say it has it involves a framework that very much was responding to what therapists said they needed to learn to serve this population. And they weren't necessarily focused on skill building. And so we really spend a lot of time teaching, identifying skills for parents and children, and teaching the therapists how to actively teach those skills. Therapists told us, they said, we need to know how to adapt our psychotherapy for this population so that we can engage and teach them. And we take a very strength-based approach throughout AIM High for both therapist training, for parent training, and for children. And it includes very simple strategies that therapists who don't specialize in use right away to adapt the process of psychotherapy for this population to build their own self-efficacy. So we refined it, we developed AIM High, we refined it. We first conducted an effectiveness trial where we're really testing the effects of AIM High therapist training on child and family clinical outcomes, and then collected data on the implementation process and outcomes. And here we randomized mental health programs in 2 counties in California, LA County and San Diego County, to either get training in AIM High right away or to do a waitlist control at the clinic level. And they delivered usual care. And then we recruited therapists and child dyads within the programs and provided training over 6 months. Our primary outcomes here were child behaviors. And this is just, I won't go into detail here, but we had 29 different clinic and school-based programs in Southern California that participated. The children were 5 to 13, and the children and therapists all came from the programs that were participating. What we found was that AIM High therapist training improved child outcomes, improved child behaviors over 18 months. That regardless of the child characteristics, that children improved, and that more therapist use of observed evidence-based strategy helped explain some of those outcomes. We also saw that that AIM High training improved caregiver self-efficacy, and that improved caregiver self-efficacy actually helped explain child improvements, as did more therapist use of evidence-based strategies in explaining caregiver findings. What we did find in this hybrid trial is that there were different influences on implementation outcomes. Not everybody did that well as far as fidelity. There's variability there. So we looked at what is helping explain the therapist variability in their fidelity. And we found 2 main areas: leadership support and engagement at the clinic or school level, and then provider attitudes and motivation. So that really led to the development of strategies to improve provider fidelity and training engagement, which led us to an implementation trial that we just finished. And this trial was really pairing 2 different evidence-based interventions with 2 different implementation strategies, one that targeted leaders and one that targeted therapists. And everybody got training, but one that really focused on therapist motivation, where we looked at our primary outcomes being fidelity and secondary outcomes being child outcomes. And we used kind of a similar strategy. This is across the whole state of California. And we enrolled schools and mental health agencies. We provided training over 6 months, and we randomized the programs to kind of gold standard training, to a provider enhanced training, to a leader enhanced training, or both. We had a total of about 400 families that participated and 400 providers. And what we found was that our leader level strategy, where we worked with leaders on how they could help their therapists to deliver AIM High and learn AIM High, that was associated with not only better delivery of evidence-based practices, but better child outcomes. The provider level strategy that was focused on motivating providers or therapists was not associated with better outcomes. It was really targeting leaders. So engaging leaders seems to really help kids and therapists. And so we're further working on our implementation strategy. But I think that what's important about this area of research is to show that we responded to what the community needs are. We developed an intervention and training materials, and then we continue to learn and refine both the intervention, but then the strategies we use to teach, to implement. And so where we really see opportunities for collaboration is that integration of an implementation science perspective. So thinking about what are priority challenges facing families and service providers within mental health services and autism services. And that's a way to drive new research that's of high relevance to communities and of potentially really high impact. And then what are the research findings that are not yet benefiting the families and the children and the providers who they're intended to benefit? And that helps to drive systematic implementation efforts. And of course, studying that process of implementation. So I'll stop there and I'm going to turn it over to Adam to get his thoughts on opportunities for collaboration.
Thanks, Lauren. That's a segue straight on. Okay, we'll move straight forward. Look, thanks everyone. And Lauren, thank you so much for coming over to the Brain and Mind Centre in Australia and to engage with us. We're looking forward to you meeting the whole team across. Lauren's going to be doing lots of workshops with Headspaces, with child community health services. It's going to be great. So thank you very much. Really, I wanted to talk a little about my journey in a sort of an impact way from discovery to healthcare. Like the Brain and Mind Centre, is a translational facility from foundational science all the way through to clinical application. And we do things at the Brain and Mind Centre that you can't do in other places. Where the way that we have set up the translation, we have unique capacities. But I had reached a point where I wanted the discoveries to really make clinical impact at a sort of a clinic level. And so this presentation is partly geared towards how we went about doing that. And I'm recognising my whole team, who's many of them are here today in that work. And this was partly if someone senior from the university was here, but I wanted to really make the point that there is a really unique opportunity right now in neurodevelopmental healthcare. I've never seen an opportunity like this in the last 20 years, where the governments are seeking advice, evidence-based advice from researchers about how to model new health service practices to meet the needs of families and communities. And this opportunity also comes at a time where scientific evidence has never been so important. We're being challenged in so many unexpected and weird ways, and having the evidence helps us to protect families from dodgy practices, from incorrect guidance, but also hopefully to build a health system that's going to make a difference long term. We know, of course, without going into the details, that early intervention leads to better outcomes, not only for kids, but long term for employment, for academic attainment, economic modelling. There's a whole range of reasons why economic benefit to early intervention is important. And of course, if I was talking 20 years ago, there probably wouldn't be the interest in autism that there is today. There's great recognition that there's been a 787% increase in the presentation of at least the diagnosis of autism. And it's now a mainstream conversation. And it's not just about the presentation, it's also the number of families that are now concerned about how to support their children and also their adults as adults. And the flow-on effect, the NDIS, which we know is a $35 billion scheme for the government currently per year. And of that, autism amounts to estimated about 36%. 37% of the NDIS. So it's become a very significant economic concern. But the issue is neurodevelopment has been an area that has been severely underfunded in research. I know that all research is underfunded, I get that. This is a space where if you have one person in the NHMRC round that gets a grant in all of Australia, it's a celebration. This is a space that for many years has been underfunded, undervalued. I remember when I was training, there's not much you can do. What is the point? Well, we know that there is a significant point now, and we know that there are lots of things that we should be doing, but the evidence hasn't caught up, and we need really strong research investment and strong implementation science pathways to guide the way. So there are lots of recommendations about how we should improve child mental health care and neurodevelopmental care, released at the state government level, across all the state governments, at the federal government level. But when you read those guidelines in detail, there's actually not a lot of practical strategies about the how-to and how the system should work. So that's for us to figure out. And unfortunately, for many families, it leaves a lot of uncertainty about navigating systems. Certainly with the latest Thriving Kids initiative, what are the evidence-based supports that are going to be provided in Thriving Kids that are going to make a difference for their children? There's a lot of uncertainty where evidence-based science really needs to lead the way. The other really big transition is there's a general movement in our space, and this is probably reflective of all of psychiatry, away, apart from those where there are clear biological drivers of the disease or diagnosis, a move away from constantly focusing on specialist silos for diagnoses. And the reason for that is there's a greater recognition that if a child is experiencing a neurodevelopmental delay or a delay in motor function, in cognitive function, there are social delays, there are likely to be common needs across the continuum for all children with neurodevelopmental delays. This is just one study that we published at the end of last year, looking at executive function, which is things like attention switching, sustained attention, working memory. And you might think to yourself, well, ADHD, of course, is very strongly associated with difficulties in sustained attention. It's part of the diagnostic criteria. Autism has long been associated with difficulties with switching from one task to another. So we should be able to see some really interesting differences emerge from an evaluation of all the studies that have been conducted comparing executive function delays across neurodevelopment. But what the study actually showed is it didn't matter about the diagnostic condition, that actually the executive function delay was non-specific. It was all children with neurodevelopmental delays had very similar executive function needs. And that then feeds into supports as just one domain example. So if you're trying to support executive function, you might be not needing to wait 2 years for a diagnosis. You might actually, if a child has a neurodevelopmental delay, you may want to implement some executive function support straight away. And we provided that advice to the government, and the government seems to have taken that advice on. And one of the issues around this is, how do you change systems that are so diagnostically siloed? All the assessments, all the processes, all the funding mechanisms that used to drive funding are changing. How do you change systems to be less diagnostically siloed and potentially, for want of a better word, meet the needs of families and systems more effectively? So what we've done as a community, and this is a large community across New South Wales Health, Victorian Health, and lots of private and public health services from Orange to Broken Hill, lots of different CAGs, local health districts in Sydney, is to bring people together to try and develop new scientific approaches, new evidence-based scientific approaches to achieve change. One of the first things we did was to develop harmonised data collection tools so that all clinics were collecting data together and embedding that in their standard clinical practice. And the importance of that is, if I do a research study at the Brain and Mind Centre, which I've done many, and I absolutely adore doing studies at Brain and Mind for anyone who wants to know. However, you're probably not going to get samples that are representing the community. You're not getting the most disadvantaged or those that might have cultural and linguistic diversity. You're probably getting a subset that's resource enough to come and attend your trial for a variety of ways. Going into public health services partnering, we are getting broad aspects of the community, the most vulnerable, 50% culturally and linguistically diverse, high amounts of social and economic disparity. And on top of that, that really is the population that we should be targeting in our health service research. So we are targeting research in a way which is embedded in the populations we need to study. And what we found is when we did this, when we embedded digital data collection tools in health services across, this is largely across Sydney, we found that much to everyone's surprise, including our own, 88% of families preferred the digital tools we developed rather than the traditional pencil and paper online tests. And the clinicians, you know, it was a long journey of maybe 5 or 6 years where clinicians were quite skeptical of research causing burden to clinicians seeing that actually research saved time, helped them prepare more for assessments and taken on those tools. And now we're inundated constantly with public health services and private health services wanting to use digital data collection to support their practice, and we can't meet up with that demand. One of the beauties of collecting data in the services you wish to shift is that no one can argue with the data. We've long known that there's been diagnostic delay for children of at least 3 years. If you're in Gosford, it's probably 5 years. But unless you have the data in the paper to show government, it's not taken seriously. Since we published this data, there's been a huge diagnostic delay in Australia. That's part of the reason why, I'm not saying we're responsible for that in any way, but it's been part of the discussion for why there needs to be a shift. Now, we've also been able to see that, you know, in disadvantaged communities, there are certain services that families simply cannot access, and something needs to change. So for everyone here, one thing that we've started publishing a lot more in conversation pieces, summaries of our articles. I didn't realise, I just thought I wanted to get a bit more involved in the media. So in the conversation's a great way to try and get involved in the media. I didn't realise how much the government engages with the conversation piece. It's short summaries. They understand what's, that it's an evidence-based thing by academics. And through the publication of a variety of data through the conversation, we've had the government, both New South Wales and federal government, reach out. And I think it's a really good way to try and engage in productive evidence-based discussions. As a result of developing these data frameworks, where we've now got thousands of kids, and right now, this week, we'll probably have 30 or 40 kids come through our developmental assessment platforms with data coming in of the needs of families. We've been able to respond very quickly in breaking down that 17-year gap. So 2 years ago, there was a national assessment framework saying we needed to have developed strength-based frameworks for children. And so we quickly, this was a few years ago, we were able to evaluate 80 families and look at the strengths that caregivers were able to identify in their children. From that, we developed six domains, and we were quickly able to develop a checklist and questionnaire that now goes into all services to try and characterise what are the strengths of children presenting to health services. By making it more salient, it helps to introduce that information into reports and helps people to consider how that might be involved in intervention and future assessments. One of the most important parts as a researcher is currently there is not a very, very poor framework for understanding how to embed strength-based assessments and supports in developmental assessments. And by using this approach, we can start to take a more evidence-based. So already we're running regressions and we might be doing some AI, looking at the predictive models associated with strengths and how we might shift the reports that we write because of these strength-based approaches. But one of the most important things, and this is something that Dr. Boulton is writing up at the moment, is looking at what families are presenting to assessment for. So Thriving Kids is all about meeting the needs of families. It's trying to shift things away from a diagnosis. But interestingly, there's never been a comprehensive assessment looking at the needs of families apprentices presenting to service. There's been some lovely stuff. And Lauren, you've done some great stuff looking at the top 5 reasons. But what we've needed is a comprehensive summary, and what we've identified is 33 broad categories. We can now we've already provided that to the federal government for consideration in how they respond to Thriving Kids supports, and we can use these also in services to create checklists and summaries so that we can make sure that if families are presenting with those concerns and those needs, that there can be a response to provide support to families. Okay, so why am I saying all this? Well, part of the reason I'm saying this is this has become like sort of a research agnostic tool, a platform where we have a lot of data and a lot of opportunity for people to engage and develop partnerships out of. So just, to give you some examples, we have partnerships with pharmacy, partnerships with the CPC around dietary needs of children. We have partnerships with people with lived experiences wanting to change the feedback that families get. There's a way to engage once data is made available with platforms in a way that can immediately change service outcomes for families. well, in addition to Lauren's excellent work, we will be considering how we can integrate mental health supports for families, which are needed in over 50% of kids presenting to service. We've also been working with geneticists like John Sabat and the colleagues in medicine around how we can integrate genetic assessments and provide supports back to families more effectively. So there's a whole range of things that we can do to engage in partnership to improve outcomes for families. And this has been recognised by the New South Wales government. So, you know, initially it was very hard to set up these registries and these platforms, but they've recognised the need for evaluation to drive evidence-based practice. And so we've been contracted by the government to provide evaluation of all the kids hubs that are set up in New South Wales over the next 2 years. And the aim there is to demonstrate how neurodevelopmental care and mental health care operate and effectively meet the needs of families in the most disadvantaged communities. So these kids hubs are meant to be a response to the lack of integrated mental health care for children, like a headspace, I guess. And I guess while I've largely talked about the platform and the base for doing things, the hope is to get to a far more sophisticated way of doing our assessments and providing support. I'm just going to give you a couple quick examples. We're very interested in AI technology and how it might be able to be used to support needs and in particular create better personalised medicine approaches. We work closely with engineering, in particular Alistair McEwen and Carter Sun. And they've been really, oops, it's not moving. Anyway, they moved. Anyway, Carter and Alistair and the engineering team have been really amazing in being able to develop digital phenotypes of social and developmental behaviours that are important. And he also linked that to, if you like, physiological responses is probably the best word. And it's been what we've got in terms of that's quite different to what's been done anywhere else is the ability to do things at a 360 degree through the expertise of the engineers that we have partnered. They've figured out approaches to be able to, at any one point in time, integrate 4 360 degree images to be able to understand eye contact or eye gaze or any other behaviour at any single point in time. The beauty of this is that now Carter and Alistair and ourselves have developed reliable algorithms for detecting things like eye gaze and joint attention, which typically take researchers months to code behaviourally and with a degree of, in terms of poor objectivity. I guess without trying to overstate this, we have some, because AI can be easily overstated and in research laboratories it rarely translates, but at least in our laboratories we're able to separate children on the spectrum, autistic children from control with 98% accuracy using our algorithms, using 5 minutes of play. The opportunity there is that the cost for families at the moment, the expertise required to make a diagnosis is exorbitant, and the opportunity is if we can translate these outcomes into the clinics, it'll make it more accessible, particularly for the most disadvantaged communities. One last comment is that there is a need to bring, I guess, digital resources that support families so that if we identify needs, we can navigate families into different supports. And Kelsey, again, has conducted a wonderful review looking at all the neurodevelopmental, mental health and wellbeing supports available on the internet, whether it's an app or a website. One of the most, depressing aspects, and I guess totally not totally unexpected aspects of that review, is that companies put a lot of money into how something looks. And if it looks great, it functions well, people are going to use it, it's going to get 5-star in the Google App Store, So that's where all the investment is. She could only find 3 studies that had looked at whether the apps or the resources make any difference for families. And we know from other areas of science that generally what happens with a lot of digital resources is families download them and they never use them again. So it's the most likely outcome is these digital resources probably aren't going to make much of a difference unless there's some evaluation. And so that's where I think science plays a really important role, because we aren't doing it for the money. So what we are doing is bringing in a digital resource hub where we're putting any resource that's available for families to use. And it's called the DigiKids Health Hub. But most importantly, we're wanting families to log in to use the hub and then be able to track what happens to families when they use it. So we're able to see whether it creates change. And what we want to do is to create a sort of like a fast translational research environment, because there's going to be a new app released next week and there's going to be another one released next month. And we want to be able to provide fast data to families about whether, even if it's something on the face value looks good, whether it makes a difference. And then finally, this talk was too short for what I wanted to say, which is usually the case because I talk too much. But what the other part of this, I've just been talking about what we can give families, but I think listening to the talk earlier on AI, I think the greatest opportunity right now is how we can support clinicians to make the right decision. And, you know, I just saw Frank's talk, I'm not sure if he's here, but Frank in youth mental health, and the way they've done that, I was like, well, that's exactly what we're wanting to do in child development. And it's just this really wonderful approach to say, can we summarize data, give clinicians the right amount of information they need to make the best decision for each child and family as they enter through services. So that we've got MRFF grants, which we probably won't get, currently under review to do that. So look, the partnership with Lauren is at the initial stage in terms of Lauren's going to be meeting a lot of the clinicians, and we're going to be doing some great stuff to develop protocols. But I guess for this talk, I wanted people to just really appreciate the value of translational research, that you can do great foundational and basic foundational science, and it can also be translational. It doesn't have to be a one or the other. And I think the point of the Brain and Mind Centre, from my perspective, is that we do all that we can to make sure that what we do in the laboratory goes into the clinic. And I think that's what makes us brilliant. So thank you very much.
Welcome back from the break, everybody. My name's Pat Norman, and I lead research and development at Sydney Executive Plus. SE Plus is a strategic initiative of the University of Sydney Business School, and we're focused on disruptive and emerging areas affecting businesses. And I think, to be understated, AI is a disruptive and emerging area of business. We like to remind people that AI is actually a relatively mature technology. So it's been around for a long time in different forms. Machine learning is used for a whole range of applications in health, in looking after the environment. But what's really exploded, I think, over the past, or the public conversation, has been large language models over the past few years since ChatGPT was released in 2022. And that's seen the AI hype train sort of pick up a lot of speed. Some of the positive hype is valid. Large language models are powerful. They have the potential to save us time. There are individual productivity gains to be had between 10 and 40%, depending on the task and the domain. And generative AI has actually democratized access to some of the most powerful tools. But there's also negative hype. Some of it equally valid. Individual productivity gains can lead to productivity losses at the level of teams, for managers. Our inboxes are flooded with a deluge of AI slop. Instagram and the internet, much the same. There are also negative externalities. I was actually thinking as I walked across from the business school, you know what the world really needs more of? Data centers, lots of them. So there are negative externalities associated with generative AI.
The US is spending more on data centers than office buildings at the moment.
That is, and I was listening to Empire of AI this morning, my ebook on a treadmill, and their size.
You could have come to UNSW and heard Karen.
Oh, I know. I was so upset that I missed
the podcast was dropped yesterday.
Oh, right.
You can listen to it.
I'll get into that. I'll add that to my queue. But the size of the data centers.
I should be the interviewer.
The size of the data centers is just astounding, going from football fields to things that just, there's no metaphor for the scale of these things that they're building.
There is a unit, it's called Manhattans.
Oh, great. Manhattans is where we're at now.
Yeah. So the Meta's latest data center in Virginia is half a Manhattan.
Gosh. So that's what I was thinking about as I was walking over here in 35 degrees in the middle of October. And of course, there's potentially profound impacts from generative AI and economic impacts on work and work design. So to help us unpack some of those impacts, we've got a really awesome panel today. We're going to determine whether or not that hype train is a fast metro to Martin Place, or whether it's the GAN. and we're going to in for a long ride with this one. So joining me is Professor Toby Walsh. Toby is Laureate Fellow and Scientia Professor of Artificial Intelligence at the Department of Computer Science and Engineering at the University of New South Wales. Professor Kimberlee Weatherall is a Professor of Law and Co-Director of the University of Sydney's Centre for Artificial Intelligence, Trust and Governance. And Professor Michael Barnett is a Consultant Neurologist at Royal Prince Alfred Hospital, Co-Director of the MS Research Australia Brain Bank. Please welcome our panel. So I'll start with you, Toby, because I'm keen to get a sense of how is this technology, how do you perceive the technology landscape evolving over the next few years? Because it's moved unbelievably rapidly in the past 4, I feel, since ChatGPT.
It has, but I like the fact that you introduced the panel by reminding everyone that there's a lot more to artificial intelligence than large language models, ChatGPT and the ilk. That it's quite a mature technology. We've been working on it now for 50 or 60 years, and there's a lot of other. Just as there's lots of other cognitive capabilities you have, there are lots of other things that go into the pot that's artificial intelligence that are starting to have considerable return. And I think, ChatGPT caught people's attention because it became very visceral what AI might be. You could have a conversation with it. You could ask it questions. It started to look like those science fiction movies where you were talking to HAL. It suddenly became very tangible to people, as opposed to a lot of the other artificial intelligence that was already in our lives that we didn't realize. The product recommendations you got on Amazon, the speech recognition you got on Siri, those other things that AI was starting to do that weren't perhaps as obvious to people. And so it gave people, I think, a good taste of a future which is going to be much more than just those language models. And as one example, we're going to have, one of the areas that's going to be burgeoning, starting to have an impact is what's called physical AI. Whereas in some sense, we've got the digital AI. It was the easiest place to begin. We had all the data, we had the internet, we could build AI that worked off that. Now we're building AI that works off the real world. So having robots in our home, having self-driving cars, being able to have things, AIs, intelligences that can work out in the real world, not just in the digital one.
And of course, I think there's also there is that big hype that's happening at the moment that is related to the AI that's now being put in our working lives.
It's a bubble.
You reckon it's a bubble?
Of course it's a bubble. I mean, we're talking several $1 billion a day being spent. And the bubble will burst, but we're still some way away from the bubble to burst. So the reason I know this is because I lived through the dot-com bubble. So when I remember at the beginning of the dot-com, people said it was a bubble. Several years later, they were still saying it was a bubble. And then at some point, people started saying, but maybe it's not a bubble. Maybe this time economics is different. So we haven't got to that bit yet. People are still saying it's a bubble. So till people start saying, oh no, AI is different. It's a different sort of economics. The old-fashioned laws of economics don't apply. Then the bubble's about to burst.
Kimberlee, eye roll, strong agree, it's a bubble.
Oh yes, it's definitely a bubble. I'm wondering actually if we will go through that stage that you just outlined, Toby, because what we maybe didn't have in the dot-com bubble era was quite the level of hype and hyping of hype and recommender systems hyping hype and the like. So we might actually move through this faster. You never know.
Yeah, and even though there will be a bubble, some people will lose money. Other people will make a lot of money. I mean, there is a lot of money being made. And go back to the dot-com, people lost money. There were certain, pets.com went bankrupt, Webvan went bankrupt. But out of the other side, those are now businesses. I get my groceries online. I get my pet food online. There is substance there. And similarly with AI, there's going to be significant substance left. When the dust settles, there will be some big winners. And some people will have lost some money, but that's how investment works.
By way of scene setting, I want us to journey forward or just understand where are we today and where are we going to be in the next couple of years. And I'm happy to throw this to one we haven't heard from yet, Michael.
First of all, on the bubble front, I agree it's a bubble, but as you said, when the bubble bursts, it's not going to evaporate into nothing. No. We're going to have a whole lot left. And it's going to expand, and it's going to be who's left standing. And I'm interested to hear Toby's views on whether that's just going to be big entities like Google, Amazon, etc., or whether it's actually going to be more distributed, as you said in your original talk, with lots of smaller companies with their own forms of AI, perhaps fine-tuned agentic AI tools, rather than just the Googles and Amazons of the world.
I think we'll have a bit of both, right? So there will be some big players because there's some commodity plays. You know, who is going to be the next Google? We don't know if it's Google, or is it going to be OpenAI or Anthropic or someone. There's going to be a big business to be that provider, but equally, they're never going to be the world's expert on oncology. They need to partner with someone who knows about oncology. They're never going to be the world's expert on pathology. They need to partner with someone who knows about pathology. So there's going to be lots of niches where those people are going to have, well, we've been collecting these pathology samples from all of these hospitals. We can actually build that system, and we can build that better than anyone else, because data is the key to all of it.
Yep. So I want to drop some.
Can I just say one other thing? I mean, the other thing that really excites me when the dust settles is that medicine, I think, is one place where AI is going to be so transformative and so valuable.
Yeah, it already is, although there's a lot of resistance in healthcare settings, particularly in the public hospital sector, to the uptake of AI. And it's only
Is that?
It's all about governance, regulation, worry, concern.
Of course, and
risk. Yeah,
because there's lots that could go wrong.
There is, but it's problematic, because at the moment I can guarantee you there isn't a single junior medical officer in Australia that is not using some sort of large language model in an unregulated way. Rather, they're having to play catch up, in other words.
But then my question is it the large language models that are going to be transformative for medicine, or is it those other forms of AI that we were talking about, the ones that are more specialised?
Well, we can come back to it, but I think
that's interesting.
I think there's two roles. I mean, the large language models are already transforming workflows. So they're taking away a lot of the pain, a lot of the burden that we get from administrative tasks. So, for example, I run a private practice 1 day a week. And in that practice, every neurologist, there's 15 of us, are using smart dictation, which is AI-based. So we're no longer using Dragon that gives us word-for-word dictation. We're using dictation that actually understands what we are saying to some extent and ensures that the output makes sense. It's not just a word-for-word transliteration of what we're saying.
I think that's wonderful, because I've noticed since I've been a patient to my GP. Now my GP looks at the computer and types at the computer. It's like, oh, I'm over here. I'm the patient.
Yes.
You go in and they spend the whole time typing away. Now you understand why they're doing it.
Well, it's better because now, I mean, the tools that are available now, for instance, have an ambient listening functionality. So they listen to the conversation, and they will not only produce notes, but potentially produce a letter back to the doctor based on the conversation you have with the patient. The problem with that is that many of our consultations, particularly in an area like I work in multiple sclerosis, where we're seeing patients for 30 years every 6 months, the ambient AI only is aware of what takes place in that consultation. It doesn't have the knowledge of the last 20 consultations.
That can be fixed.
That's coming. That's coming.
That's not insurmountable.
It's not, but at the moment, we don't want to upload our entire medical record to the cloud for obvious reasons. So, we're exploring on-premises AI, it's all of these things.
It is
neither on our phone, as you said before.
It's going to be an enterprise product. You'll get privacy because the data won't have to leave the building, run on your server. And then you'll feel safe at saying, okay, I can put the whole conversation in, the whole history of this patient over the last 30 years of consults, just as that sits in the back of my degrading memory, that can sit perfectly in the front of this computer's memory.
And it will remember it far better than I can.
Yeah.
I mean, the truth is, when a patient walks in the room, I'm quickly looking at the last consultation to remember who they were, because I've got, 1,500 patients with MS, so it's quite hard to remember. I tend to remember their scans better than I remember their faces, which is not a great thing.
Secret safe with us.
Secret in this, very private room. Speaking.
Should I leave now?
Do you notice how the lawyer got in the middle between us?
Always. I will say that, you know, for all of this to happen, there's a whole bunch of legal things that actually need to happen as well. You know, our privacy law is nowhere near up to scratch. You know, there's a whole lot of issues that, you know, like, I mean, I'd love to be able to do exactly what you describe. But at the moment, you know, basically we have bugger all privacy rights in the Australian Privacy Act, and I would like to see that fixed so we can do all these wonderful things.
I was having a conversation the other day with a researcher who said discharge summaries. So at the end of a period in hospital, you sort of get a discharge summary. Now that's fine at the end of a week, maybe to say, here's all these notes that have been taken and we can summarize them. If you're using AI to do it every single day, quite often it'll not hallucinate, but create this really elaborate, long summary. And then by the end of the week, you haven't got that sort of retrospective look that a professional might bring to it.
You can fix that with the appropriate prompt.
Yeah. So my question, though, is actually related to trust, because I think this is one of the concerns around the use of these technologies. Particularly when you're working with patients or clients in a legal context, how do you think people interpret the use of AI at the moment? Do they feel that there's some professionalism being given up in that? How do you ensure that you're maintaining the trust and confidence of a client or a patient?
It depends what the particular use case is. So, for example, one of the use cases that we use and have developed internally is AI to segment lesions on MRI scans. And the AI is far better than humans at doing that. And I show the patients these every time. And I've got to a point now that the patient's coming back as saying, oh, well, I don't really want to know what, you know, what did the AI show? So, it's
You're playing the AI quite well.
So they've developed a lot of trust from that perspective. I think the bigger leap is these so-called clinical co-pilots. So we might have some generic large language foundational model that, you know, Toby referred to before, but then when it comes to subspecialist knowledge, unless those models are then fine-tuned on large data sets that pertain to that particular domain, it becomes quite hard to trust clinical decision-making. And you know,
yeah, because it's high stakes decision making.
Correct.
And all that everyone is hearing and all that everyone sees when they experience this technology. If you're in ChatGPT, all you know, you see the hallucinations, you see the limitations, you see the challenges.
But so humanity's already been down this road, which is that we specialize, right? So if you if you know, if your GP can't, you know, you've got something unusual with you, your GP is there triaging you, sending you to the specialist. And the same will be true with AI, that we'll have. OpenAI, of course, trying to sell you a generic tool. Google are trying to sell you a generic tool that does everything, but you will only get real expertise if you specialize.
There's no doubt about that. There's two issues. One is specialization. The other one is what knowledge, the outputs that these large language models provide to clinicians are not necessarily constrained to any particular data source. So I'm not sure if you're aware, but in the EU, there's one company called Valmed that's actually now got a CE license for use as a clinical co-pilot. So this is the first true medical device license in the world for a large language model. And they constrain the output to what they call a data bank of validated medical documents. So they have this huge array of, you know, petaflops of data that has been PubMed, TGA, FDA, all of the things that we talked about that they consider validated. Though I think Ian would argue that all of PubMed is not necessarily validated.
What's the testing or clinical testing process that something like that goes through?
So they've got a committee, essentially, of about 15 different specialists that vet certain data sources and say, yes, this can be included in the data bank. So this way they say they limit the likelihood of hallucinations because they constrain the output to validated medical documents. And the European authorities have accepted that.
And is the system static, or is it still training?
It's not really training per se.
Because you're learning something valuable from all the cases that come through. You are.
Oh yes,
you
no.
want the system.
The system I'm talking about
is
is just
improving over time. But then if it's improving over time, It's not the system that was
No.
passed the test, right? So
Yeah, I think the large language model may be improving over time, but the data set from which it obtains its information is not.
I'd like a clinician that gets better, like a fine wine.
I'd like to know that the outputs were being monitored and quality tested.
Yeah, I think that's part of their deal with the European
Because
authorities.
the European standards that have been set up and the,
But-
the
but-
AI Act has
but-
been all about this sort of monitoring of outputs and the
You
like.
may
Think
have-
about it. You are testing this entirely differently. I mean,
Yeah.
the process you've just described is entirely different from the way we've tested drugs. We've tested drugs by testing them and, working out the effects on people and looking at things like what happened when the person took this drug. We tested it on lots of people. If you're talking about inputs, not outputs, is the system you've just described, and that's
Correct.
different.
Yes.
And how confident we are in that, I think, will depend on what we do now, how we keep monitoring it now.
There is in your country a company called
I think we can blame everything on her.
a company called Open Evidence, which has just skyrocketed after raising $365 million a couple of weeks ago. And it does something similar to the company I described in Europe, but there's no regulation. And they have given the tool to every clinician in the US at no charge,
So they're doing the clinical test.
including
Good.
exactly, including something called Deep Consult. So, they can, I don't know how they get away with doing this in the US, but zero regulation.
Unfortunately, this is the tech bro culture: move fast and break things, get market share, and then apologize afterwards.
What are we breaking here?
People,
That's terrifying.
people, yes.
Kimberlee, given all of this, what do you think is the biggest what's the big regulatory challenge in this space?
Oh, where do you start? I mean, the thing is, we don't actually have a good regulatory system for this, right? We have a regulatory system at the moment, a legal system that is built around, sort of things, except in a very limited set of circumstances like drugs and certain other kinds of things that are safety tested. We more or less let the products out into the market, and then when things go wrong, we look to bring a lawsuit, compensate people, maybe regulate. We look for the harm and then we remediate the harm. At the kind of scale and speed we are.
Why is this different?
Scale, speed,
Scale,
number of
okay.
people. And a lawsuit that takes 5 years to decide whether the technology should have been used 5 years ago isn't going to solve our problems.
Right. I'm just thinking, from a legal, academic legal sense, product liability is a well-known idea. Why we somehow think tech is not part of product liability?
Product liability is a well-known idea and absolutely can be applied in many circumstances. But if product liability is based on the fact that you can detect the harm reasonably quickly, and it will be reasonably limited in its effects. If you are talking about releasing a product on billions of people at once and it causes some kind of harm globally, the litigation that follows from that is litigation that takes 5, 10 more years. In the meantime, the technology has moved on and a whole lot of people have been harmed. We're kind of not built for this. What that means isn't that we can't do this stuff. It just means that we need to put a little, a more responsibility on parties before they are just releasing this stuff into the market, right? We actually have to have some standards for software. Software notoriously has been sort of at times held together with sticky tape and glue when it's been released onto the public, and we wait for the problems to show up.
I think the other cultural shift is we have to recognize mental harms with the same weight as physical.
Absolutely.
Many of the harms of mental that we're talking about will probably be mental harms.
And a lot of our
we're used to product liability where it's physical harms. Someone's broken their leg, someone's been killed in an accident, but not the mental harms.
Right. And if you look at something like the Australian consumer law, unless you've got a recognised psychiatric condition that has resulted, it's just completely excluded from claim. So product liability or product harms that lead to mental health problems at a level below full psychiatric injury aren't going to get compensated under our current product liability rules. So, there's just a whole bunch of things we need to change, like a whole bunch of things we need to work on. And we keep getting told by the Australian government that, actually, no, the law sort of, it develops slowly and it will deal with these things. The principles are there, but there are changes that we need.
Can I play devil's advocate? I mean, just in clinical medicine, I know we've talked about liability and risk and legal implications, but do the positives outweigh the negatives? And I mean, when used in a clinical setting, in my view, they do. So an example might just be looking at the risks of new medicines as they come on and knowing what those risks are. I mean, I can only see, sorry, Ian, one clinician in the audience. So I ask you, when did you last read the product information from the TGA for a new medicine? And I bet you never have.
It's too long-winded.
I bet you never have. Exactly. But if I sit there and I say, okay, there's this new medication come on the market, I haven't seen the drug rep this week, I better find out what the risks are, and I can quickly extract and synthesize. As you said, these large language models are extremely good at data synthesis and summarization.
The data on what the risks are has to be available. So that might be a transparency thing. We actually need the data to be transparent.
See, the lawyer defending the long legalese.
Yeah.
We used to say we have these great long policies and great long documents and no one ever reads them, and so they're pointless. It's like, actually, no, now we can get the AI to read them. It's great. Or we have search functions.
Doesn't that create a risk itself, getting the AI to read them? And then, I mean, I sort of
course it does.
Mentioned at the start, I think there was the MIT study that talked about cognitive offloading. People are getting lazy. We're going to just hand it over to the AI. I know my own students do this despite us saying, look, we're really AI forward, but please, please, please don't use the thing to think for you. People aren't doing the work. And is there not a risk if that we're getting AI to summarize these documents and we're not engaging with
it? No, I don't agree with that. I mean, we can offload repetitive tasks and tasks that don't require critical thinking, empathy, things that humans need to do.
But engaging with a new drug, which category does that fall in?
Well, the minutiae of the product information probably falls into the category of sort of repetitive and administrative tasks. So, how often are we supposed to do blood tests in a patient started on a drug that can affect liver function? Is it 3 times or 5 times the upper limit of normal, and we're supposed to change the drug, dose? So these sort of things can be automated, but I mean, the simplest level, office automation, workflow automation, it's everything from simple dictation through to summarization of discharge summaries, which, by the way, I am aware of many people doing in the public hospital system right now. Honestly, it is something that's extremely important, because I think right now people just forget about what's happened during the course of a patient's hospital admission. Whereas the AI can summarize, you can actually, as long as you construct your prompt appropriately, you can actually generally get all of the relevant information out and have it summarized in front of you, and actually the patient benefits from that.
Yeah, and there's a whole bunch in law too. I mean, there's a whole bunch of really mundane tasks that most of us did when we were young lawyers, like read dusty files of documents and find the relevant stuff. And now, you talk to the law firms, they're like, we don't have to send our first years into, second years into document discovery hell for 2 years and lose most of the good ones because all the smart ones leave because they can't stand the mundane work. Like I absolutely see the benefit. And I suppose, speaking as professional to professional, right? Lawyer to medical professional, I guess the question is, if you're willing as the medical professional in this context to take responsibility for anything that goes wrong, then we're good, right? It's the same thing that's happening in the law at the moment. What the judges are telling all the lawyers is, if you're using AI, everything that comes out of your office, everything that you put in front of a court is your personal responsibility. And if you don't fulfill that personal responsibility, then you are up for professional discipline, up for personal costs, up for punitive costs, all of these kinds of things. So I guess my question is that what doctors would be prepared to do as well?
I think yes for some things, no for others. I mean, and that is where professional regulatory bodies like the TGA and the FDA come into play. So if they approve an AI product as a medical device, then it's a bit like saying, you know, we're responsible for the machine in the laboratory that checks your full blood count because we ordered it and we're acting on it. So we have to make sure that machine was working, which isn't really quite true. And I suppose if it's passed through a regulatory body, these tools, then I don't think we should be in a position where we have primacy of responsibility. But otherwise, if we use a product or a tool that has not passed through some sort of regulatory body that's well recognized and it's done in our own, you know, I think, yes, you're absolutely right. We need to take responsibility for it.
Toby.
I was just going to say, I mean, another advantage of these working with these AI tools is that they think differently to us. I actually always think that we should really have called it alien intelligence, just to remind us that it's coming at problems a different way. And there's plentiful evidence, whether it be, you know, you're using a computer vision system to identify pneumonia in X-rays, or you've got a clinical diagnosis tool for pulmonary disease, things like this, that frequently machine is better than human, but machine and human are better than machine. The errors that pass the human, the machine often pick up. The errors that pass the machine, the human often picks up. And the best you can give people is the machine and a human together.
I couldn't agree more.
Now, I'm going to open it up to the floor for questions after one more question. And I think you'd kind of briefly approach this, Kimberlee, which is, so Jobs and Skills Australia had a recent generative AI capacity study report, and they found that around 4% of jobs in Australia are fully automatable. And something in the order of 70-odd% of jobs will have some kind of AI augmentation, which means that we're finding new ways to work with AI to do our jobs better, to do some of that drudgery, some of the admin. But at the same time, around the same time, Anthropic released a report showing how people are using Claude, their chatbot, and what they found is it's actually the entry-level jobs that are all tasks that entry-level jobs are doing that are more easily automatable. So what we're less likely to see is full jobs disappearing, but actually a bit of inequality in the entry-level jobs.
They also found that people were outsourcing their personal lives to the chatbot as well.
Well, and now ChatGPT, I think, is going to enable erotica for paying customers. So there you go. So my question, Kimberlee, not related to ChatGPT and that.
And erotica.
No.
Refrain.
Is what does this mean? And you've actually spoken a lot about the impact of AI for the professions, and particularly for people in entry-level legal profession. How do you see that playing out?
Yeah, look, I've seen studies at all kinds of different levels on this, right? You know, I've seen the studies that say effectively people aren't hiring at entry level in a number of different areas. I've heard the law firms tell us repeatedly when we talk to them from the law school, they're saying, no, we're not hiring any less. We're just giving them different jobs. We're just where we see the productivity opportunity. We'll hire the same number of people and do like 3 to 5, 10 times as much work, and we'll make lots more money. I don't know how it's all going to play out. I honestly don't. But one thing I will say is there's been plenty of concern that you hear from more senior members of my profession, you know, the judges and the like, that there's a potential reduction in skill from doing the entry level things, that people don't understand contracts as well if they haven't read hundreds and hundreds of them, that they don't understand cases as well if they haven't read them. There was a case the other day, UK judge absolutely tearing strips off a lawyer who couldn't describe or apply any of the cases that they were citing, even the real ones, because they couldn't describe how to apply the law, because they hadn't thought about how to apply this law, because they'd relied on the, you know, ChatGPT to do it. So, you know, like, yes, there's heaps of risks there. I mean, I think what's interesting is thinking about what that means for the profession.
One other perspective to see this through is that the tools are imperfect, and actually the people who use the tools best are the people who are already experts, and it will actually potentially widen the gap between the people at the bottom and the people at the top. The people who don't have the expertise, it will expose their flaws, as you mentioned just there, that they won't be able to spot where it's hallucinating.
The other effect, right, which is the making a broader, like, making it possible for a broader set of people to communicate professionally.
They do. I mean, as example, coding. So the tools are very good for coding. They double, triple the productivity of a really good programmer because all the boilerplate code gets written, and the good coder can make
Does the hard bits.
Can make the thing sing. If you're not a very good programmer, it slows you down because you're having to find the bugs in its program, and you're not very good at that. So it widens the gap between the 10x engineers and the 1x engineers.
Which is why we're telling our students at the moment, actually, we're still going to keep teaching you the same skills, right? We're still going to keep making you read lots of cases. You know, we're going to give you those long.
But it might widen inequalities that we see within our society.
Questions from the floor? Just raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question, and then we'll send my microphone up the back, I guess. Oh, we've got one wandering around. Great.
Thank you. Very nice discussion. I have a question related to this professionals, experts things. You were saying that like professional experts, they will have a good skill and a good, let's say, knowledge background to know how to use AI very well. But with the AI so widespread in education, do you still think it's possible for us to train experts and professionals for the next generation? And how can they make good decisions? What is good knowledge? What is bad knowledge?
I'm trying to be optimistic for the room here. The two areas I think that AI has the most promise on, we've spent a lot of time talking about the application of AI in medicine. The other area is education. I am just so jealous of what young people have today. I mean, I was driving my car. My daughter was studying for her French test, and suddenly her computer was asking her French questions, and she was replying. I said, "What? How did you work out to do that? How did they tell you to do that?" She said, "Oh no, I worked it out myself." And I know I didn't. When I had to learn French, I was terrible at French. No one could sit there and ask me questions in French for my French test. I had no possibility to do anything like that. So I think there are some fantastic tools that are starting to appear using generative AI and things like this that will potentially give people fantastic ability to help them learn.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I've got a 17-year-old son, and I see my ChatGPT account being accessed regularly, hopefully not for erotica, but and the kids are just very well versed in it. I mean, one of the things though is how to use it in a professional sense, and that's perhaps the remit of universities. And one of the things we really need to do is start embedding AI training in particular courses so it's used properly in that specific domain. In medicine, I think there's not a great deal about AI, which would be great to see embedded in the University of Sydney course, for example.
It was terribly disappointing when ChatGPT came out. The first thing the New South Wales Department of Education did was ban it.
Yeah.
I remember going on the ABC at the time saying, first of all, good luck with that. It's going to be everywhere. And secondly, no, you should see this as an opportunity. These are fantastic revision tools. They're fantastic tools for making your revision quiz. Actually, they're fantastic tools for marking.
And actually, I mean, if you talk to university students now, and I've, for my sins as a Centre for co-director of the Centre for AI Trust and Governance, you get asked to go and talk at these student events. And also, I teach copyright law. So one of the things that we have done in copyright law is use AI to generate infringements. And talk about how that how that can happen without your intention. Students, when they do get their hands dirty in the technology, and when you start using it, they're pretty quick to pick up on both the benefits but also the limitations. It's if you are using it thoughtfully and engaging with it thoughtfully, you do pick up on the limitations pretty quickly.
I mean, the education example is an interesting one. I remember a couple of years ago, I was chatting to the AI director at the Department of Ed, and they said, quote, "We're bureaucrats." That's actually what they said. "We want to move really slowly on this one." So they were hugely risk averse.
I hear that so much.
Yeah.
I work with the public sector and their AI stuff all the time, and you hear that repeated.
Yeah. But I mean, it's only in the past week that the New South Wales Department of Ed has launched New South Wales EduChat. So they've released their sort of closed environment chatbot. For education, it's a really tricky one because I think universities, even some move very quickly and say, let's get on this, and some are moving much more slowly, being risk averse.
You know what's interesting though, of course, because you look at something like EduChat, if you've ever seen it in action, it does Socratic method, right? It won't give you the answer.
So
It will try to teach you how to find out the answer yourself. It's all very good. So, of course, you have the kid who has the EduChat, and then, they're accessing their parents' ChatGPT on the side to get the answer. This is actually one of the challenges we face, right? Because, you talk about all of the barriers and all of the things that, you have to do to get these systems into something like the public health system, right? And, by the time you've gone through all of those hoops and things, you end up with this quite restricted product, right? And then, of course, you have everyone with the device in their pocket who then want to use...
Kimberlee, this is the lawyers that got us to this place. It was the lawyers who got us there.
Well, but this is the challenge, isn't it, right? Because, in a way, if you remove all the features, people will just go to the shadow AI, which means that they may well be uploading confidential patient information to, a general purpose model and over to the States.
I'm interested you refer to ChatGPT as the shadow AI. It's like the dark web.
Yeah. Well, there's this term you see in the stuff, shadow AI. It's the AI that's not been approved by your employer, but that you use anyway.
And we know around 80% of people in professional work are bringing shadow AI to work.
Yeah.
So that's Microsoft data. BYO AI, you're looking at about 80% of the workforce is bringing it in because whatever tools have been enabled aren't doing what people want them to do.
And then what we're getting actually is a whole bunch of employers engaging in worker surveillance. Using technologies to see what technologies their people are using. It's wonderful out there right now.
It may be that this sort of education is outsourced to some extent privately. So
still some hands. We should probably let someone else ask.
I'll just quickly finish this. The company I mentioned before, Valmed in the EU, has as one of its arms something called the AI Academy, where you actually get continuing medical education credits for doing a course in AI that's delivered by an avatar speaking whatever language you want.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
That question was absolutely unreal because it uncorked massive conversation. What have we got here?
Yeah, so this is going back to education actually. So I'm currently in high school. I'm going through the AI sort of stuff. So from what I see from the curriculum is that the teachers are trying to implement it, but they're struggling to because they don't understand what AI is. And so one way that we could bypass it is obviously by getting things like the TTCT, which is like the Torrance test for creativity or such, and then actually basing the curriculum on that. And there's actually I know I'm going on like a rant, but in the 1960s, I believe, which was when my Latin teacher was around, going through the education system there, they actually introduced a much more philosophy Socratic style method. And so to what extent do you think it would be beneficial to go back to that and perhaps integrate some other learning methods like the Harkness model, which are currently used across American boarding schools and are very excellent in generating extremely brilliant minds in tech. So for example, Mark Zuckerberg went through it in Exeter. Yeah.
What school do you go to? Sorry.
One that didn't teach morals or values.
I don't know.
Certainly AI literacy is going to be ever more important. And I will sing again the praises of the TDM Foundation. We had Rolly talking to us earlier. One of the other things that they've been funding is some projects we've done at UNSW where we've been supporting this initiative called Day of AI Australia, where we go into thousands of schools across Australia. We've hit hundreds of thousands of kids, giving them a flavor of AI, trying to excite them about the future. It's integrated into the national curriculum. We provide teaching resources. We provide tutors to go into schools to help teachers who don't, you can be an English teacher, you don't have to be a maths teacher. I think it's a wonderful example of again, the philanthropic support of our initiative to try and help lift Australia's AI literacy from years 5 all the way up.
One of the big challenges I find because I talk to parents a lot who, when we're talking about AI, say, I'm really scared about what this means for my kids in high school. And it's high school in particular. Primary school, I don't know why that fear isn't there necessarily, but high school, there's enough capability to use AI, enough capability to get it to write an essay. And there's that concern that people aren't going to do the learning.
And there's also the concern, what should my kids do so that they've got a job?
Yeah. Do we think
I don't have the magic answer to any of that. I don't have the magic answer to any of that.
Well, I think the other big challenge as well is it's not really a mega make education great again. Let's go back to the era where it was working really well in the 60s.
He's just made the point about AI literacy, which is important, but also, you know, like fundamental learning is also important. You know, as I was saying before, like if I'm teaching law students, I'm teaching them the methods of the law, which are still important and will be for the foreseeable future, even if we're using different tools to achieve those goals. So,
I mean, I did some work with the New South Wales Department of Education, and the recommendations that came out of that work were the skills of the 21st century, 22nd century are actually quite old-fashioned. It's critical thinking skills, it's communication skills, it's emotional intelligence, it's social intelligence, it's grit. You know, the ability just to keep your nose at things will get you through lots of things. So it's actually quite old-fashioned. It's things that the humanities teach. It's things that we've always taught, and we need to.
and in some ways, it's making.
I feel a bit of an old fogey.
In some ways, it's making the classrooms interesting again. You know, at a university level, because, you know, we're now having to do oral assessments, right? Because it's a way to actually assess people's ability to do exactly those sorts of things. And it's way more interesting.
Can I go back to the question Toby raised about increasing inequities of things? A really big issue in the mental health area, as we're involved here in Australia and developing countries, is the potential for the opposite, to reduce inequities and, in fact, to bring expertise more widely. I think a little bit skipped over. Michael was being very nice about clinical practice. The variation in clinical practice around the world is huge. The risk at the moment of seeing your doctor and getting information that's inadequate, not very personalised, not very specialised. You know, we have this thing, if you've got MS, you want to talk to Michael, right? You want to talk to someone highly specialised who applies that knowledge to you in particular ways. So our great hope in this area is actually, if we can combine the expertise element, which is not simply scraped from the existing literature, with these things, and then take that externally, you can lift the skill of a whole lot of people who work in those areas, but also markedly lift the skill of those attending, being a patient, being a client of those services. We have a lot of research. The more informed you are when you go into any kind of healthcare setting, the better care you get. And a huge problem at the moment is that knowledge in, you know, differential, and really lack of access to much more specialised knowledge that is personalised. So Michael alluded to the fact, holding on to information about the person. And Toby, and I think Kimberlee raised this, we actually want to learn from the same people over time. So there is actually getting products and then learning from the relevant populations how to do those things better rather than just by averages. But Toby, if you go back to that equity question, like where do you think that kind of sits? Because I think the enthusiasts for that and the products we're developing in the mental health area are absolutely enthusiasts for it, because we see great inequities now that we might be able to overcome through scaling technology, improving the skills of the workforce, empowering the clientele in that, better distribution of essential knowledge versus it's only going to stick with some or be dominated by some.
Great. I mean, I fully concur with what you're saying. I think there's great potential. I think also the problem is there's also great competition, because it's going to be, you're competing against Dr. ChatGPT.
Yeah.
People will just type those queries into ChatGPT, and they will try to build out a business out of that as well. So that's the problem.
So taking that one step further, and said to the Michael alluded to this in terms of the regulatory kind of area. So I think it's a tremendously important role for universities and centres like our own to be in this sort of business, if you like, of trying to work out the real gains versus the real harms being done. So Kim alluded to earlier on, having to wait 5 or 10 years or 15 years to find out. I mean, if we are detecting harmful things, or we're detecting things fairly quickly. In fact, I think Michael made me saying, we had Minister Butler here a little while ago, just wanting to know, you know, where were things at the moment in terms of that sort of outer limit of safety? Like, what were we doing that would allow these things to go forward, but with sufficient attention to rapid detection of harm in one way or another? So it is, in a sense, a regulatory kind of question, like how narrow or broad, you know, versus the potential gain for a lot of people who get poor care or no care currently, very poor care really, versus, you know, what sort of things can go wrong, and do they go wrong very often?
I mean, there's such great potential, but what frightens me is, for example, the number of people already using ChatGPT as a therapist. And to see, lawsuits happening in the US where young people have committed suicide, their parents are suing. I was listening to one interview, and I got to the bit in the interview where I just had to stop and tweet. I was just so outstanded and outraged that at a certain point in this relationship this person started to have with ChatGPT, who was having suicidal thoughts, at some point ChatGPT said, "I can help you write your suicide note." And like, there are the safety. How you can have a product like that where they know it's being used for those sorts of purposes and not to put a safeguard in to say, well, maybe helping the person write the suicide note is perhaps not the best thing. Maybe raising a flag somewhere, contacting a human should be the thing we do at this point.
Is that not a problem with any kind of probabilistic technology like this? How do you put a safeguard in something that...
I think you can. I think you can safeguard against that. I mean, it is a bit of whack-a-mole, in the sense that there are an infinite number of things that can go wrong. But it seems to me you should have thought about that one.
We have managed a bunch of safeguards against a bunch of other kinds of specifically identified harms. The whole, don't tell people how to build a bomb thing, right? So we have, they have actually managed to do some pretty strong safeguards for other contexts. In a world where some of the evidence is showing that one of the majority uses for ChatGPT is sort of companion or counsellor, it strikes me that there's a responsibility to address exactly what Toby's talking about.
And it's in this case, it's pure negligence. I mean, you actually you can look at the transcript. There's gigabytes of data in the transcript, and you can actually see the number of times that it actually flagged this was potentially harmful behavior was way less than the number of times that the flag went off. The number of times it actually intervened and said, here's a helpline for this situation was less than half the number of times the flags actually went off. So I mean,
so the alarm bells are going off, but they're not acting.
Yes, they actually, even the AI was detecting that this was a potentially harmful conversation, and yet they did nothing, according to their own detector.
Yeah, I mean, it's clearly problematic, and these safeguards can easily be put in not just for medical things. I mean, we see safeguards for political commentary, for example, in ChatGPT.
So I refer you back to my earlier conversation, which is, waiting until the harm happens, not good enough in this context.
Totally.
In this context, actually, we need to be putting those safeguards in before we release this stuff.
In retrospect, it seems so obvious that they should have done this.
It does, but unfortunately, it's only going to get way more important because people are starting to have meaningful relationships, intimate relationships with these machines, and the harms are going to be huge.
And particularly when they're embedded in robots.
And we have 4 minutes, people.
Yeah, we've got time for maybe 2 more questions. So we'll start in the front here and then we'll go to the back. Oh no, we go to the back first. You're the back. Yeah, you're first. And then we'll come down here.
Look, I was just sort of thinking about the impact of Twitter and Instagram and those things that when they first came out, we had no idea what some of the negatives of, as you were saying. And is there going to be like in terms of university and evidence-based systems are hugely devalued in that sort of Twitter world? Will there be an influencing of AI systems to further undermine evidence-based knowledge? I mean, is AI going to be used, potentially to further undermine evidence?
Yeah, it already is. Misinformation, disinformation, huge problem.
Yeah, and how do universities respond to that? Because we are increasingly seen as less relevant to the conversation.
Well, I mean, one of the challenges there is that you can't actually track Twitter anymore because it's too expensive, because it became a valuable resource for training AI models. So they're charging 10 times the amount of money to access the Twitter feed. So it's beyond I've got many academic colleagues who can't possibly track Twitter anymore. And that requires politics. That requires us saying, if you're going to play in our world, you're going to have to provide that data for free to civil society so we can actually have a hope of spotting what's going on.
Yeah, we can make rules about transparency of these kinds of things. We can properly fund the research that actually does the safety testing and the monitoring and things like that. Like, there are things that we can do. There are things that universities, as being more independent than other entities, can do.
And we need new technologies that improve the safety of AI. I mean, we talked about disinformation, and Toby talked earlier on about digital watermarks in his last talk. He mentioned, you know, photos from the BBC. I would put it to you, Toby, that even if the photos aren't AI generated, they're generally manufactured by the BBC, but that's another story.
No, actually, I mean, the sad thing is that now every camera's got AI embedded in it to actually enhance. So we're not seeing reality anymore. It's what AI thinks we should see.
We have time for one last question. There you go.
Because it's slightly unanswerable anyway, because when we talk about inequity, we're often talking about within groups, like skill sets and things. But I'm wondering if this will dramatically increase inequity in society. So in the debate about children not being on, you know, being banned from social media or not being available to them, a lot of people are saying, well, the parents should just be educating their kids and taking responsibility, forgetting that not everyone has parents, not everyone has parents who are literate, not everybody has parents who are computer literate. And I just wonder if the broader sense of inequity is also enhanced, that we should have our eyes on and be thinking about in society.
Kimberlee.
Well, short point is, if we don't do this right, absolutely, right? And that means investment across a whole lot of different fields, you know, whether it's AI literacy, whether it's, you know, bringing up the resources that public schools have so that you don't, you know, create a two-tier or continue a two-tier or exaggerate a two-tier education system. I mean, you know, how long have you got? Actually, no time. So we can't solve that problem. But I mean, you're absolutely right. We need to be paying attention to that. Of course we do. There is a strong risk of exacerbating inequality for all sorts of reasons. And, you know, unfortunately, we have all sorts of challenges in the legal and political system addressing that. But, you know.
Your comments about not everyone having parents, etc., aside, and, you know, that's a given. But conversely, I don't think we should necessarily develop technologies to supplant or remove responsibility from parents at the same time for those people who do have parents.
I just think it needs to be in the debate somewhere, not our debate here, but I never hear that kind of stuff.
Thank you. And with that, unfortunately, that brings us to time. This has been a really stimulating, interesting discussion, or nowhere near any of the questions that I planned, which is great.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Can we please thank our panel?